Hey guys, tonight we travel far across time and sand to a place where the desert is anything but silent, and the sun does its best to bake every living thing into a sun-dried tomato. But deep beneath the surface of this ancient Persian world, there's a secret one that's not just cold, it's sweet. Imagine, for a moment, that you're walking through a dry, sun-bleached plain, somewhere near the edge of the Doshti Kavir. The heat is shimmering off the stones, and the only breeze you feel is your own sigh of regret for not packing more water. And then, like some surreal mirage, you see it. A massive dome made of pale mud brick, rising out of the ground, like a giant upside-down bowl. Not a palace, not a temple, and certainly not a mirage. This is a Yaktil, a 1,000-year-old invention so clever that even your smart fridge back home might raise an eyebrow in admiration. And yes, it's storing something cold, possibly even dessert. You've arrived just in time, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Midnight in Montreal, sundown in Singapore. I always read them before bed. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step closer to the dome. The surface of the structure is smooth, the color of dried wheat. From afar, it looked like a huge dune, but now you see the fine cracks in the material, the subtle intentionality of each line and curve. It isn't there by accident. You duck into a narrow entrance and descend a short ramp downward. Yes, downward. Even though you're already standing in the desert, the air shifts immediately. It's cooler. Not icy yet, but the kind of chill you feel in a basement that's never quite reached by summer. Now here's the thing. You probably wouldn't survive a week here if you had to manage this system yourself. Not because it's dangerous, no crocodile traps or collapsing tunnels, but because the precision needed to make this work without electricity is the kind of patience and planning modern humans gave up somewhere around the time we invented scrolling. The Yaktil isn't a simple building, it's a carefully calculated thermal weapon in the battle against heat. These massive structures could be up to 20 meters high and dug just as deep below the earth. They were made with a special waterproof mortar called saruja, quirky mix of sand, clay, egg whites, goat hair, ash, and lime. No, it doesn't smell as bad as you think, and yes, it's surprisingly effective. The result, a building that could repel heat, absorb the cold from the night air, and trap it underground. Mainstream historians agree this technique dates back at least 2,000 years long before refrigeration, air conditioning, or convenience stores. And yet, here it is, a functional icehouse in the middle of a literal oven. And not just for science, it was all about indulgence. There's something deeply human and mildly ridiculous about the idea that someone looked at a 45 degrees Celsius desert afternoon and thought, you know what I need right now? A frozen rosewater noodle dessert. And the ancient Persians delivered. In fact, one quirky historical tidbit mentions how Persian nobility would sometimes challenge each other to ice feasts, essentially summer garden parties, where the goal was to outdo your rival's cooling methods. Think of it as a bake-off, but colder, and with way more smug glances over golden cups of half-frozen grape syrup. But it wasn't just the elite. Ice and cool storage eventually became a part of everyday Persian life. Yogurt, milk, even fish. People preserved whatever they could. Some rural communities still use versions of Yaktils today, blending ancient wisdom with solar panels and, well, okay, some very enthusiastic goats. Now, you continue deeper into the structure. The steps are narrow, and the sound of your sandals is muffled by the thick air. Your breath clouds just slightly. The walls curve inward above you like a dome-shaped cave. If you didn't know better, you'd think you were in a beehive or maybe the world's weirdest spa. One thing's for sure, if Instagram had existed back then, this place would have been flooded with slow-panning videos captioned "Desert, chill vibes only." Of course, historians still argue about the exact origin of the Yaktil. Was it truly a Persian innovation, or did similar structures in Egypt and India predate it? Some even speculate that nomadic knowledge passed through oral tradition might have seeded the idea across regions. But regardless of who came first, the Persians perfected it. They turned freezing into an architectural art form. And as you run your fingers along the cold, smooth interior wall, you realize just how brilliant that is. No wires, no batteries, no fumes, just airflow, insulation, and really smart dirt. Outside, the sun still burns. But here, in the heart of this ancient fridge, it might as well be January. You feel your eyelids start to sink a little, like soft sherbet in the shade. And just when you think the tour is over, a whisper from deeper inside beckons. There's more to see. Much more. And this is only the beginning. You follow the gentle curve of the ramp downward, and the deeper you go, the more the desert fades from your skin. Your shoulders start to relax. The harsh light of the outside world dims to a dull amber glow, lit only by tiny oil lamps mounted along the walls, one flickering flame for every 100 bricks that keep the heat at bay. You're entering a world where fire and sun no longer matter. Here, it's cold that rules. And in ancient Persia, cold wasn't just a luxury, it was a mission. A mission that began not with technology, but with a craving. No matter how regal your lineage, or how extensive your library of astronomy scrolls, you still had taste buds. And when the weather cooked everything in sight, those taste buds wanted relief. Not just cool water, not just shade. No, what the nobles wanted was the impossible, a dessert that could melt because that meant it had once been frozen. And so began one of the oldest quests in comfort food history. You might imagine a grand vizier waking up one morning, wiping sweat from his forehead, and turning to a servant with a weary sigh. Bring me something icy. The servant, perhaps named Parvis, probably blinked twice and thought, sure, Your Excellency. Should I also bring the moon and a snow leopard while I'm at it? But rather than laugh off the request, the early Persians got to work. They didn't invent electricity, and they weren't about to drag glaciers down from the Himalayas every week, although, stay tuned. Instead, they got creative with what they had: sand, brick, geometry, and a deeply personal vendetta against heat. You linger at the bottom of the Yakshal, where the floor dips into a large central basin. It's here that the coldest air settles, heavier than the warm air above. You can imagine large clay jars resting in this hollow, each one filled with milk, syrup, or juice, the outside beaded with condensation like a reward for patience. A faint smell of dried mint and saffron lingers in the air, embedded into the walls from centuries of storage. This was not just a fridge, it was a vault. Only those trusted by the household or the royal court could access its contents. Some yakshals were even sealed seasonally, with clay bricks pressed in place like a desert time capsule. And the best part, the cold came for free. Not instantly, not with a button, but reliably, night after night. The Yakshal worked by harvesting nighttime desert temperatures, when the air could dip dramatically, especially in winter. Water poured into shallow pools outside the Yakshal would freeze overnight. In the morning, workers would break the fragile sheets and carry the ice into storage. Or, if you were lucky and connected, you could even have your ice delivered from much further away. Which brings us to one of the most delightful fringe facts in ancient logistics. Elite Persian families sometimes imported snow from the Zagros Mountains. Yep, you heard that right. Teams of men, sometimes called barfcation, literally snow pullers, packed snow into straw-lined crates and carried them down, carefully timed so the snow would arrive just before it vanished into puddles. Some scholars believe they even traveled at night or pre-dawn, walking barefoot to detect any melting through subtle dampness underfoot. Now imagine you're one of those snow couriers. You've hiked for hours, days, even dodging bandits and sunstroke, all while nursing a giant snowball like it's a sacred relic. You arrive dusty, sleep-deprived and lightly frostbitten, only to hand it over to a sleepy nobleman who mutters, "A bit slushy." Historians still argue whether this snow trade was practical or just prestige signaling. Some say the cost and labor were so extreme that only ceremonial uses like royal feasts or temple rituals justified the effort. Others argued that mountain snow supplemented the local ice stores, especially during warmer years when freezing ponds weren't an option. What's agreed upon is that if someone in ancient Persia served you a snow-cooled drink, they were either wildly rich, deeply in love, or very much hoping you'd promote them. Back in the Yakshal, you take a moment to press your palm against one of the inner clay urns. It's cool, not frosty, not freezing, but cool enough to feel miraculous in a place that could cook bread on the sidewalk. You can almost hear the gentle clink of ice shards in a nearby jar as someone outside drops a scoop of frozen grape pulp into rose water. The silence is thick and soft here, like snow that's forgotten to melt. And as your body begins to settle into the rhythm of this ancient refrigeration chamber, you can't help but marvel at the sheer stubbornness of it all. This wasn't just about cooling dessert. It was about claiming a small victory over nature, about telling the desert, you may roast us by day, but tonight, we chill. You leave the cold belly of the yak shell, blinking as your eyes adjust to the golden haze outside. The sun hasn't moved much, still perched in the sky like a smug overseer, but somehow, everything feels cooler now. Not because the temperatures changed, but because you know that even here, in the belly of the desert, someone once figured out how to freeze water, just to swirl it with sugar and serve it in a silver bowl. And that someone didn't stop there. You're about to learn how the very structure you just visited came to be, because the most magical part of the yaktshul wasn't what it held, it was how it was built. There's no scaffolding, no blueprint, no laser levels or GPS. Just human hands, centuries of observation, and a shocking amount of egg whites. Really, you find yourself walking around the base of one of these domes, your fingers trailing along the thick outer wall. It feels like hardened sandpaper, rough, dry, solid. This outer layer isn't just for show. It's part of a genius recipe known as rouge. Now, this might sound like a trendy dessert topping or a forgotten spice blend, but it's actually the ancient Persian version of waterproof concrete. And the ingredients, oh, they read like a dare: sand, clay, goat hair, lime, ash, and egg whites. You're not making meringue here, you're creating a substance that resists heat, repels moisture, and shrugs off time like a camel in sunglasses. Historians still debate whether the egg whites were strictly necessary or just an old construction superstitions. Some believe they acted like a binder, others argue it was more symbolic. Either way, somewhere out there, a lot of omelets died. For the cause of climate control, the dome's shape wasn't arbitrary either. That cone-like silhouette, wide at the base and narrowing to a point, served multiple purposes. First, it gave the structure stability, allowing it to stand tall and proud for centuries, with zero steel reinforcement. Second, and more importantly, it channeled warm air up and away from the ice storage below. Heat rises, remember? Well, the Persians definitely did. You take a few steps back to look up at the full structure. It's stunning in its simplicity. A perfect, sloped spiral of protection. And the best part, it's passive cooling. No fans, no freon, just smart use of geometry and airflow. Even modern architects tip their hats to it. As you move along the side of the structure, a narrow slit near the top catches your eye. It's not a mistake, it's a ventilation shaft, perfectly placed to allow hot air to escape. Some even included double walls for added insulation, with air gaps in between to further trap the cold. You realize this isn't just ancient ingenuity, it's architecture with attitude. And then you see it. A man kneeling at the edge of the outer platform, smoothing out wet sarouge with a palm-sized trowel. His clothes are plain, his brow glistens, but his hand moves with reverence. He doesn't look rushed. No one's yelling deadline or budget. He's building for a century, not a season. You watch the smooth arc of his work as he blends the old with the new, ensuring the dome survives another brutal summer. It's here you notice something else. There's no central pillar inside the yaktshul, no internal support beams. The whole dome holds itself up with that one elegant shape. It's part physics, part poetry. Now, here's your quirky fact of the hour. Some builders used nothing but piles of compacted earth and rotating scaffolding made from bundled reeds to shape the inside of the dome. As the structure rose, they packed more mud around the base, forming a spiral ramp that doubled as both support and a work platform. Once the dome was sealed and the mud dried, they'd remove the earth from inside, shovel by shovel, leaving behind a hollow, whispering cavern of cool. And yes, in case you're wondering, some poor apprentice probably did get stuck inside once, or twice. The Persian equivalent of Steve, not again. As you walk the perimeter, the wind picks up slightly, brushing your face with sand. It carries the scent of baked clay, ancient lime, and something faintly floral. Perhaps from the gardens nearby, or maybe the scent just lives in the mortar now. Like perfume on an old scarf, you take a seat in the shade, feeling the warmth under your legs from the sun-soaked stone, and marvel at how they managed to do it all without modern tools. No concrete trucks, no air-conditioned design offices, just dirt, sweat, clever math, and stubborn pride. Historians still argue, Whether these constructions were planned using early architectural blueprints, or simply passed down orally from one generation of builders to the next, some believe the knowledge was preserved through secret builder guilds. Others think it came from trial, error, and really good memory. Whatever the truth, one thing is clear: they weren't improvising. These weren't lucky guesses. This was desert mastery built to last. You close your eyes for a moment, letting your mind drift back in time. Maybe you're one of the workers, scraping sarouge under a burning sky. Or maybe you're a foreman, balancing on the dome's edge, calling out instructions with a clay mug of rosewater tea in hand. Either way, one thing is certain: you're in the presence of something timeless, and right now, that time is slowing down beautifully. The wind carries you along a worn footpath that snakes away from the actual. You follow it instinctively, as if drawn by the scent of something old and sweet in the air, though not cloying. It's the kind of smell that makes you think of cold honey on warm bread, or the crisp scent of stone after a night of rain. As the path winds downward, you begin to realize where this trail leads: the source of the ice itself. Because, as ingenious as the actual was at storing the cold, it still needed raw material. And in a country where temperatures can reach well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, you can bet that didn't come easy. No magical ice fairies, no enchanted springs, just determination, physics, and some very tired men. You come across a wide, shallow depression in the earth, a kind of sunken courtyard lined with polished stone. This, you soon learn, is one of the freezing pools. By day, it's just a glorified ditch, but by night, it becomes a miracle in slow motion. The trick is in its design: long, narrow, and oriented precisely to maximize exposure to the open night sky while minimizing exposure to daytime heat. Here's where the desert becomes a paradox: scorching sun by day, but often bone-chilling cold at night, especially in winter. That rapid heat loss is what the Persians took advantage of. During winter nights, water would be poured into these shallow pools, sometimes just a few inches deep. Then, while the stars danced above, the freezing would begin. By dawn, workers would tiptoe out, literally, because here's your quirky tidbit: the ice was often so thin that only the most experienced could walk on it without cracking it. They'd break it up into chunks, carefully stack the pieces, wrap them in layers of straw or sawdust, and haul them back into the yakchul to add to the slow-growing mound of winter hoard. And that's just the local supply. If the pools didn't produce enough ice, say during a warm winter or for a particularly demanding royal feast, then they'd call on a different force altogether: the mountains. Yes, you've heard it before, but now it's time to picture it. A caravan of men winding their way down from the Zagros Mountains, each hauling a load of ice carefully encased in wool, straw, and prayers. Sometimes they used clay jars with cork-like stoppers to trap the chill inside. These weren't quick trips. A full journey could take 2 or 3 days one way. By the time they arrived, the ice was diminished but not gone. The biggest deliveries were saved for royal courts, high feasts, or festivals, and no one wasted them. According to one fringe report from a medieval traveler, a Persian wedding he attended included a ritual where blocks of mountain ice were sculpted into flower shapes, each with rose-water syrup drizzled over them. The bride was supposed to eat one without flinching. He noted she smiled politely, but may have lost feeling in her jaw. Of course, historians still argue over how widespread this practice was. Some believe the snow trade was more few precious scoops of snow used to cool wine or medicine, not entire crates hauled for daily use. Others think it may have been a full-fledged seasonal industry with organized routes, storage hubs, and even contracts. The truth likely varies by century and region. But either way, it shows you one thing clearly: the craving for cool ran deep. Back at the freezing pool, you sit on the edge and imagine the scene: a cold night, quiet except for the faint creaking of ice forming across the surface. Maybe a few stray cats tiptoe around, wondering what the humans are up to. A boy leans over the edge, breath fogging the surface, amazed to see a layer of ice forming where, hours ago, there was only still water. You dip your hand into what remains of the current pool, not for ice, but for a sense of connection. The water is tepid now, barely cool, but you can feel its weight, its quiet resistance. It reminds you that nature isn't always an enemy to be conquered. Sometimes it's a dance partner. The Persians didn't wage war on heat. They outwitted it with timing, patience, and architectural empathy. Nearby, an old man with silver streaks in his beard adjusts bundles of straw by a cart. You realize he's a kind of ice shepherd, overseeing the fragile journey from water to crystal to storage. He doesn't speak, but you don't need him to. The rhythm of his movements tells you all you need to know. This work is ancient, repetitive, and oddly soothing. Like stirring a pot slowly, or folding linen under soft light. You breathe deeply. The air is dry, but no longer harsh. Even the sunlight feels different, no more tolerable. Maybe it's the knowledge that, somewhere nearby, a cone-shaped dome holds the cold like a secret. Or maybe it's just that your mind has cooled down, finally. Either way, the desert feels less oppressive now, like it's made room for your curiosity, or your nap. The path from the freezing pool leads you back toward the village outskirts, where the hum of daily life begins to return. Chickens complain gently in the dust. A vendor lazily waves away a fly near his stack of dried dates. A breeze meanders past, carrying with it the sharp scent of cumin and something floral, maybe jasmine, or perhaps just nostalgia. You glance toward the market square and realize ice wasn't just about desert. In ancient Persia, it was part of an economy, a system, a resource as valuable and sometimes as divisive as water itself. That's right. Welcome to the world of ice commerce. Because once the Persians figured out how to make and store ice, they weren't going to keep it all to themselves. Not entirely, especially not when neighbors started showing up, peeking over the compound wall like, so ... Any chance you're selling a bit of that sweet cold? And soon enough, they were. You find yourself approaching a small stone building that looks like it might be a bakery until you realize it's an ice storehouse with a ledger. Inside, clay tablets, styluses and ink sit beside bowls of half-melted slush. There's no neon sign, no cash register. But make no mistake, this is a business. Prices were set based on supply and demand. And since supply was quite literally frozen in time, demand could get competitive. You could buy ice in small amounts, just enough to keep your dairy fresh, or to cool a drink. But some households with more influence had seasonal contracts, ensuring regular deliveries through summer months. Now here's your quirky moment of the hour. In some towns, there were ice brokers, think ancient middlemen, who negotiated ice trades between regions, sometimes using mulberry paper receipts tied to goats. Not that the goats knew, they were just the delivery system. But the point is, there was a whole microeconomy built around coldness in a hot world, and not everyone played fair. You settle onto a bench outside the storehouse, watching as a younger man argues with the record keeper over what appears to be a shorted delivery. It melted, the supplier insists with a dramatic shrug. The road was hotter than usual. You want cold, you walk the route yourself. Meanwhile, another customer silently accepts a half bag of chipped ice in exchange for a small gold ring. You realize then that ice wasn't just a luxury, it was leveraged. Something to be traded, hoarded, even gifted as a political favor. A bowl of ice during a summer wedding could turn someone into a village legend. Refusing to share it could just as quickly spark a passive-aggressive feud over the neighborhood water jug, and historians still argue whether these early systems of ice trade were centralized under royal oversight or managed informally by local guilds. Some records suggest elaborate taxation policies, where the crown took a percentage of all frozen goods. Others hint at a looser, almost gentleman's agreement. Those who controlled the cold kept the peace. Regardless, this much is clear. Storage changed everything. It allowed foods to last longer. Milk could ferment more slowly, creating better yogurt. Meats could be hung and cured without racing against the sun. Medicine stayed viable past sunset. The presence of ice turned what would have been a frantic daily rhythm into something more forgiving, more manageable. You walk past a row of clay pots, half buried in the ground, their contents cooling in shaded alcoves. Inside one, you spot what looks like yogurt flecked with mint and cucumber. It's thick, creamy, and cold enough that the jar is sweating gently. A vendor hands you a bowl. No charge, just a nod and a smile, as if to say, you've earned this. The taste is ... silent. That's the best way to describe it. Smooth, subtle, not loud like modern sweets. The coldness isn't icy, it's whispering, like a stream in early spring, or the hush of wind across stone. Around you, life goes on. Children chase each other with date pits. A woman fans her face lazily with a woven palm frond. Somewhere behind you, The familiar dome of the Yakchal gleams under the sun like a baked moon dot, and in the back of your mind, something shifts. The idea of cold is no longer mechanical. It's personal, human. It took coordination, relationships, compromise. It wasn't just about the physics, though, that mattered too. It was about people getting along, bartering, planning for a summer they knew would scorch them all. Ice became a quiet promise. We can outlast this heat, together. You finish the last spoonful of yogurt, letting the coolness rest on your tongue a little longer than needed. The man who served you is already turned away, slicing cucumbers for another batch. There's no rush. In a place where time once slowed just enough to freeze water, it feels okay to linger. And so, you do. Your feet carry you further through the village's winding lanes, past low adobe walls and flowering courtyards, where the rhythm of life hums like a well-oiled loom. The sun's no gentler, but your awareness has shifted. You no longer see the desert as oppressive, it's just the stage, the backdrop for one of humanity's chillest triumphs, because now it's time for dessert. You're guided by scent, this time a sugary thread of rosewater and rice flour wafting on the wind, like a call to prayer. You follow it down a narrow side street into a modest courtyard, where someone's stirring a copper pot over a low flame. A boy fans the mixture gently with a piece of woven palm, while a girl nearby gently slices a bundle of semi-frozen noodles into a ceramic bowl. You've arrived just in time for Falloodeh. Now, if you're not familiar, Faluda is basically ancient Persian sorbia, semi-frozen dessert made of thin, delicate rice noodles, soaked in a syrup of sugar, rosewater, and lime juice, often served with a splash of sour cherry or barberry extract, sometimes topped with a dusting of ground pistachio, and the key ingredient, cold, not freezing, not solid, just that dreamy, slushy sweet spot where crystals and syrup tango lazily in the bowl. You're handed a portion. No ceremony, just quiet expectation. The first bite sends a tingle through your teeth, not from extreme chill, but from surprise. The noodles are soft and slippery, almost floral in taste, like eating perfume, but in a good way. The syrup is sharp, slightly tangy, and oddly refreshing. It doesn't punch your palate, it wanders across. This is not the type of sugar rush that makes your eyelid twitch. This is bedtime sugar. Sleepy sugar. The kind of dessert you eat slowly while leaning against a warm wall as the stars blink into place above you. Faluda wasn't just a delicacy, it was a cultural moment. A reward. It was served at weddings, religious festivals, royal banquets, and late-night family gatherings. It was made for summer and, ironically, for slowing down. You couldn't rush it. The syrup had to cool properly. The noodles had to be just firm enough to hold together without turning into glue. The ice, of course, had to be chilled at just the right temperature, not too solid, not too melty. Now here's a quirky detail you probably didn't expect. In some villages, Faluda was sold by street vendors who carried miniature Yakchal replicas strapped to their backs, basically big clay flasks packed with snow and straw. They'd scoop the desert out with carved wooden paddles, announcing their arrival with soft bells. Think of it as the prequel to the ice cream truck, but with sandals, donkeys, and poetry. Speaking of which, you spot an older man nearby, scribbling in a small notebook as he eats. When he notices you watching, he simply says, "I write better when it's cold on the tongue." Then he chuckles softly, nods toward your bowl, and adds, "Eat slowly." Faluda doesn't like to be rushed. Historians still argue about whether Faluda originated during the Achaemenid period or came later under the Sassanids. Some scholars claim it evolved from medicinal concoctions used to lower body heat. Others insist it was always desert first, science second. And while recipes varied from region to region, one thing was clear: Persians knew how to blend function with flavor. The dessert you're holding is more than a treat, it's a microcosm of Persian ingenuity, a product of clever cooling systems, seasonal awareness, and a poetic obsession with balance. Sweet and sour, cold and warm, crisp and soft. You lean against the wall, letting the last of the syrup pool at the bottom of your bowl. Nearby, the girl who helped prepare it drops a few frozen barberries into her mouth, wincing playfully as the cold catches her by surprise. Her laughter is soft and contagious. A breeze rolls through the courtyard, brushing your hair and fluttering the hem of someone's robe. It smells faintly of cardamom and lime peel. In the distance, you can hear the echo of a water seller calling out his route. his voice bouncing lazily between sun-baked alley walls. For a brief moment, you forget entirely about the world beyond this courtyard, about deadlines, errands, and notifications. Your only task now is to notice how this place moves slow, careful, effortless, like Faluda sliding off a wooden spoon. You watch as another batch of syrup is poured over crushed ice, and the process begins again. The copper pot, the palm, frond fan, the gentle slicing of noodles. You smile to yourself. This isn't just desertite architecture, agriculture, trade, engineering, and art, served in a bowl that sweats in your hands. And just like that, you've tasted the desert's softest secret. The pavilion slowly fades behind you, muffled by laughter and the faint clink of spoons against ceramic. You're walking now along a path shaded by rows of cypress trees. Their tall, slender forms reaching toward the sky like sleepy green sentinels. The breeze carries the earthy scent of mossy fountains and sun-warmed stone. Your destination, just ahead, a small dome, still under construction. No royal canopy here, no musicians, just a crew of workers balancing buckets and bricks, moving at a pace that says, "We've done this before." Because now, you're about to witness how they built a yakchil, not the one you visited earlier. All cool and silent and complete, but from the ground up. And let's be honest, if you tried building one yourself, you'd probably end up with a glorified sandcastle that melted in your sleep. Thankfully, you're not in charge. Here's what strikes you first. There are no blueprints. No one's checking diagrams. Instead, there's a man standing in the center, tracing shapes into the dirt with a long stick. Occasionally he nods. People move. Stones appear. Mortar is mixed. And from this seemingly relaxed chaos, a foundation begins to take form. It all starts with a circular base, dug deep into the ground. This isn't just a preference, it's science. Going underground means tapping into the Earth's natural insulation. The deeper you go, the more stable the temperature. And if you're planning to keep ice from becoming puddles, stable is your best friend. Next, the crew begins stacking bricks around the edge of the circle, not randomly in a spiral. Each brick is laid slightly offset from the last, like ascending a coil. Slowly, the shape starts to curve inward. The dome isn't formed by forcing it. It emerges, guided by the invisible hand of math and memory. This is where your quirky detail of the day comes in. To shape the interior, they use a giant pile of dirt, literally. Builders pack a conical mound in the center of the site, shaping it with wooden boards and wet hands until it matches the desired dome. Then, as bricks go up around it, they rest gently against this earth scaffold. Once the exterior dries and holds its shape, the dirt is dug out from inside, revealing a hollow chamber that's somehow symmetrical, smooth, and strong enough to last centuries. The precision is startling. No measuring tape, no laser-level rope, sticks, and an uncanny intuition passed from father to son, builder to apprentice. You suspect the master mason at the center of this group could build a perfectly plumb arch blindfolded, and possibly has. Just to prove a point, the mortar they use is that same magical blend, Saruja mixture, so waterproof, resilient, and heat-resistant that modern engineers have studied it with raised eyebrows and quiet jealousy. The ash helps bind. The goat hair keeps it from cracking. The lime provides chemical resilience. And the egg whites, well, no one agrees. Maybe they strengthen the mix. Maybe they just made the foreman's chickens really anxious. Historians still argue whether sarouge was applied in one thick layer or built up slowly over time, like Venetian plaster. Some believe different recipes were used depending on region, humidity, or the builder's personal taste, like the sourdough starters of ancient architecture. And it wasn't just structure. The design was functional from top to bottom. Every angle of the dome was carefully chosen to reflect sunlight in summer, but trap cold during frigid nights. The top always had a ventilation shaft, often crowned with a wind catcher or badger, a kind of ancient air conditioner that pulled in cooler air while pushing hot air out. You pause as one apprentice, barely old enough to grow a beard, points to the top of the half-finished dome. He's holding a small wooden model and trying to explain the airflow pattern to another boy using hand gestures and dramatic puffs of breath. It's like a TED talk, but dustier. And despite the grit, the noise, and the sheer labor of it all, the atmosphere here is almost meditative. Everyone has a role. Everyone moves with calm purpose. There's no shouting, no frantic energy, just the slow birth of cold in the middle of heat. You take a seat on a pile of unused bricks and watch as a team works together to smooth the inner lining with curved wooden paddles. One man whispers a lullaby under his breath as he works, perhaps for himself, perhaps for the dome. Either way, the song fits. In the distance, the completed yachtals shimmer like drowsy giants, their domes catching the light. And this one, it's not done yet, but it's already a promise, a contract with the future. Once finished, it will hold winter deep into summer. It will cradle rosewater syrup, yogurt, and saffron custards like priceless relics. It will stand long after its builders have faded into memory. And maybe, just maybe, someone hundreds of years from now, someone like you will sit where you're sitting now, tracing the gentle curve of the wall and wondering how something so simple could be so brilliant. You rise slowly, brushing the dust from your hands. The air smells like clay, sweat, and cool determination. You leave the builders to their work and walk away in silence, because honestly, you don't want to break the spell. You stroll a little further, and the village begins to thin. The noise of pots clinking, chickens squawking, and the occasional lazy merchant haggling over pomegranates fades behind you. Ahead, another dome rises on the horizon, but this one is different, smaller, perched on a stone platform, and topped with what looks like a crown of wooden fins catching the breeze. Congratulations, you've just arrived at the roof of a yachtshell, specifically its crowning glory, the windcatcher, or badger. Now, in case no one's told you yet, the desert wind is a fickle beast. Sometimes it huffs like a dragon, dry and furious. Sometimes it just vanishes. The Persians knew this, and instead of trying to tame the wind, they invited it in. The badger looks like a chimney, but it's far cleverer than anything attached to your fireplace back home. It's an ancient, low-tech air conditioning system that works entirely off passive airflow. No electricity, no moving parts, no please unplug for 10 seconds and try again nonsense, just design. You take a few steps up a sloping ramp, and soon you're eye level with the wooden fins. Up close, you can see the slits carved into each side of the windcatcher, facing multiple directions. No matter which way the wind blows, one of those slits will catch it, and once the wind is pulled inside, it's directed downward through vertical shafts into the interior of the yachtshell, carrying cool air in and pushing warm air out in a lazy, continuous cycle. You lean against the dome, the clay warm under your palms, and imagine standing here at dusk 1,000 years ago. The wind rustles your robe, your eyes squint against the sun, and beneath your feet, the air inside begins to chill, bit by bit, as the hot breath of the day is slowly exhaled skyward. Here's a mainstream historical fact to store away for later. Trivia night. Windcatchers weren't limited to yachtshels. They were a central feature in Persian homes, especially in Yazd and other desert cities. Some houses had entire systems of interconnected badgers and underground channels called qanats to keep indoor air moving and cool, even in 100 degrees Fahrenheit heat. You'd sit by a small fountain in the middle of your home, the air drifting down from the roof and passing over the water before circling through the room. Natural AC, 9th century style. Now for your quirky nugget of the evening. Some households use strings of beads or tiny bells inside the wind shafts, not for decoration, but to listen to the air. If the wind slowed, the bells went still. If they clinked or danced, it meant the cooling flow was active. A sort of ancient HVAC status update, with charm. Historians still argue, however, about the true origin of the windcatcher. Some insist it began in ancient Egypt, with early versions found along the Nile. Others claim it was an independent invention perfected in Persia, refined through generations of dry summers and ambitious architects. What's undisputed is that the Persians made it an art form, from private homes to palaces. These elegant towers dotted the skyline like desert antennas tuned to the frequency of breeze. You sit for a moment on the edge of the dome, legs dangling over the curve like a sleepy bird on a warm perch. The wind whistles softly past the slats above you, making the dome hum ever so slightly, a low, round note that sounds like the desert singing to itself. From this height, you can see the layout of the village yachtshels scattered like inverted teacups across the edge of town, fields stretching beyond, and in the distance, the faint silver shimmer of snow still clinging to the Zagros peaks. You wonder how many tons of ice have passed through this very structure over the centuries. How many hands stacked those frozen blocks? How many bowls of Faluda were shared here? How many small victories over heat were won under this very dome? The air is noticeably cooler now, even though the sun still rides high. The wind above you sighs again, content with its slow, endless work. You trace a small crack in the surface of the dome beneath you, not damage, just time leaving its fingerprint. And you're struck by something. This entire system works because it doesn't resist nature. It collaborates with it. The design doesn't fight the sun, it avoids it. It doesn't silence the winded channels. It doesn't battle the heat, it outsmarts it. And honestly, you think, that might be the most relaxing thought of all. A shadow passes overhead, a hawk, gliding silently on a thermal. Below, a door creaks open, and someone begins hauling a bundle of herbs across the yard. Life continues, as it always has. And you take one last breath of wind-filtered air before slipping back down the ramp, returning to the warmth of the path below, refreshed, not just by temperature, but by perspective, because now you know the secret. The cold isn't hiding from the desert, it's thriving in it. Your feet touch the warm earth again, and you walk on slowly, as if your thoughts are still a few steps behind, lingering at the wind-catcher's crown. Ahead, the light begins to change. The sharp white of high noon has faded into the golden lean of late afternoon, where shadows stretch longer and the air turns syrupy and slow. You pass by a grove of pomegranate trees and follow the curve of a canal lined with polished stones. The water trickles lazily alongside you, barely deeper than your ankle, but it's enough to keep the breeze feeling gentle and moist. This canal, you're told, leads to another yakchal, but it serves a special purpose, because now you're about to enter the world of nighttime freezing, that paradoxical trick of the desert, where the same landscape that fries you all day can, with a little help, make ice by moonlight. You arrive at a wide open basin or roof, no dome, just a large, shallow depression in the earth, like a dried-up pond, carefully leveled and lined with dark stone. This is a freezing pit, the desert's version of a refrigerator that resets every 24 hours. You crouch beside the basin and run your fingers across the surface. The stone is smooth but pocked with tiny marks of evidence of hundreds, maybe thousands of freeze cycles. Water goes in at dusk. Ice is harvested by dawn, all without electricity, without machinery, just physics and patience. The trick is surprisingly simple. The desert, especially in central Persia, experiences extreme temperature swings between day and night. During summer, it might hit 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit in the day, and drop close to freezing by dawn. That drop, combined with the low humidity and clear skies, creates the perfect conditions for radiative cooling. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Persians used this effect deliberately. They built these freezing pits in places where airflow was strongest and sunlight weakest, usually on the north side of town or against shaded walls. Water was poured in thin layers, no deeper than a finger, into wide, flat pans or directly into the stone basin. This maximized surface exposure and allowed heat to escape into the night sky. Then, sometime between midnight and the first rooster's crow, the miracle would happen. A crust of ice would form, and this wasn't a rare event. In winter, when the night temps dropped even lower, entire sheets of ice could be harvested by morning. Workers would gently chip the ice into blocks and transfer them, sometimes still glittering with frost, into the waiting mouths of yakchals. Now, for your quirky tidbit, to protect the forming ice from dust, curious cats, and overly helpful children, families sometimes laid silk cloths or woven mats across the basin overnight. In wealthier areas, servants were assigned to guard the ice, which sounds prestigious until you realize it involves standing perfectly still under a freezing sky, shooing away owls with a stick. You sit at the edge of the basin and imagine it happening, the hush of the village asleep, the crackle of ice just beginning to take shape, the moon overhead, not judging, just observing, and below, in this shallow pool, a process older than most empires unfolds in silence. Historians still argue about how widespread these methods were. Some believe nighttime ice-making was limited to the more arid central regions, while others argue it existed wherever large-scale ice storage was needed. There's even debate over whether the Persians discovered the technique independently, or learned it through contact with neighboring cultures, perhaps India, perhaps Mesopotamia. But everyone agrees on one point: they mastered it, because it wasn't just about freezing water, it was about doing it consistently, year after year, with zero automation. It was about preparing for a scorching July by planning carefully in January. Lesson, you realize that modern life could probably relearn. A soft rustle pulls your attention to a figure across the way, a boy with a shallow wooden pan, filling it with water from the canal and setting it gently into the basin. He works methodically, not rushed, placing each tray like a tile in a floor of glass, not yet born. You wave, but he doesn't see you. His mind is already in the stars. You recline against a cool stone slab and stare upward. The sky has begun to darken, turning from pale blue to amber, then lavender. Soon it will be midnight, and the freezing will begin again. Not with trumpets, not with ceremony, just silence, and the quiet shiver of a world letting go of heat. There's something soothing in that, a kind of surrender. You close your eyes, if only for a moment, and imagine being the one to wake at dawn, to lift the first slab of ice from the basin, to feel its sharp edges against your palm, the satisfaction of knowing you've caught cold in a land built on heat. And you think, maybe that's what cleverness really is, not inventing machines, but learning how to live with nature's mood swings, how to turn opposites into opportunity, heat and cold, day and night, effort and ease. The sun has dipped completely now, leaving only the gentle blush of twilight behind. The sky above you is velvet and peppered with the first shy stars. You rise from your spot near the freezing pit and begin to wander again, this time with no destination. The day's warmth has faded, and the desert now sighs with relief, like it too was holding its breath. But it's not just cold air. You're stepping into one of the most curious natural phenomena the desert offers, how it can be absolutely blistering by day, and yet feel like a cold breath on the back of your neck just hours later. Welcome to the physics of the desert. You reach a small stone bench beside a courtyard wall, and as you sit, you feel it. The wall is still warm from the sun, but the air, it's chilly. There's a distinct contrast that tickles your skin like you're walking through alternating pockets of memory. Let's slow down and unpack this. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Persian plateau, especially its central desert regions, is known for extreme diurnal temperature variation, which is a fancy way of saying it's hot during the day and cold at night. Not just take off your jacket cold, but genuinely chilly, even when the day has been unbearable. Temperatures can swing -30 degrees Celsius up to 50 degrees Fahrenheit in a single-hour cycle, and while that sounds like a punishment, it's precisely why Persian ice storage and freezing methods worked so well. Unlike more humid climates, where the moisture holds heat like a blanket, the dry air here is terrible at insulation. Once the sun sets, there's nothing to stop the earth from radiating its heat back into space like a long exhale. You stare up at the sky. It's not just beautiful, it's useful. That clear expanse acts like an open vent to the cosmos, sucking up the Earth's stored warmth. The Persians didn't just survive this effect, they weaponized it against the heat. And here's your quirky detail. Some builders even used black stone or dark clay for their freezing basins, because it absorbed more heat by day and then rapidly released it at night, hastening the cooling process. It's like preheating your oven, in reverse. Historians still argue about the exact measurements and data they may have tracked. Did they keep written records of temperatures? Did they rely on observation alone? There's evidence that priests, astronomers, or court engineers may have noted moon phases and seasonal air patterns to optimize freezing conditions. Some even suggest that poetic descriptions of frost in Persian literature doubled as environmental cues. But while scholars debate, you feel no urgency to solve the mystery. You're already soaking in the results. The air grows cooler still, and you tug your robe a little tighter. Across the wall, a cat curls up near a terracotta pot, still warm to the touch. There's something oddly soothing about the contrast, the chill in the air, the lingering heat in the stone, like the day and night are shaking hands before switching shifts. You glance around the quiet village, and you notice something new. There are no glowing lights, no hum of appliances, no buzz of artificial chill. And yet, the people here have figured out how to make ice, store milk, and serve chilled desertol, while the stars mind their own business overhead. You begin to realize how rare this is. In the modern world, cold comes from plugs and bills, and the low hiss of a compressor. But here, it comes from patience, geometry, earth, sky, a kind of intimacy with nature that doesn't try to dominate it, but instead nudges it gently toward cooperation. You stretch your legs and rise slowly, brushing sand from your hands. As you walk, the village around you feels quieter than ever, not empty, just content. Doors are closed, lamps are few. Somewhere, a child is being tucked into bed, beneath a cloth dyed with indigo stars. Someone else stirs a pot of warm milk over embers. And all the while, the freezing pit quietly gets to work. Invisible, dependable, cold. There's no announcement, no buzzers, just the business of night. Ice forming, wind catchers humming, and domes holding secrets like silent guardians. And you walk slower now. Your heartbeat has synced to the pace of the place. You're not hurrying to understand anymore. You're simply following the chill. Asterisk. Your feet bring you toward the outer edge of the village again, where the domes thin out and the world begins to widen into open space. The moon is higher now, cool and calm, casting long blue shadows across the landscape. You pause atop a gentle hill, and there below, bathed in silver light, two yakchuls stand side by side, like twins dreaming the same frozen dream. But these aren't just storage spaces. Tonight, they're battlefields. Yes, really. You're about to witness a most unusual chapter in Persian history, the Ice Cream Wars. Now, before you get your hopes up, there are no actual swords made of popsicles, and no epic duels fought with ladles of chilled custard. But make no mistake, the rivalries were real. Because once ice became a sign of power and prestige, so did the deserts made with it. And the Persian nobility, always eager to outdo one another, began to use frozen treats as a subtle form of social upmanship. You find a stone to sit on and imagine the scene. Two aristocratic families hosting summer feasts on the same evening. One unveils trays of faluda, served in delicate cups with pomegranate glaze. The other responds by offering ice milk steeped in cinnamon and saffron, sculpted into little bird shapes that sing when touched with warm honey. The guests pretend to care more about the poetry recital, but they don't. They're here for the ice flexes. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Persian royalty and upper classes did indeed host elaborate summer feasts that featured frozen and chilled dishes. These weren't just meals, they were occasions designed to showcase wealth, engineering prowess, and refined taste. If your estate could produce ice in August and serve chilled drinks beneath a vine-covered trellis, you were someone. And here's your quirky highlight. Certain households began developing secret recipes for their cold treats. One legend tells of a dessert made with candied almond paste, rose petals, and snow from a specific glacier that was only harvested during the full moon. Another tale involves a cook who created a frozen melon soup so light it floated on water only, to have the recipe stolen by a rival cousin through a cleverly planted flute. Player. Yes, espionage happened. Not for battle plans, not for state secrets, for dessert. Historians still argue whether these rivalries were rooted in true culinary innovation or simply theatrical indulgence. Some accounts praise certain dishes as revolutionary early versions of what would later evolve into kulfi or gelato, while others dismiss the tales as exaggerated court gossip, the ancient equivalent of "I heard she chilled her wine in sapphire bowls." Either way, they reveal just how much social weight cold food could carry. You stroll down the slope now, toward one of the domes. It's quiet, but something about it feels alive. You imagine servants moving inside by lantern light, checking storage jars, rotating bowls, scraping frost off the inner walls with polished spoons. Not hurried, not chaotic, just steady, practiced, intentional, to be trusted with the dessert. At a noble feast was no small thing. You didn't just make something delicious, you had to time it perfectly. Too soon, and it melted before it could be served. Too late, and it froze into an uncuttable brick. The right texture, temperature, flavor. It was a balancing act that required knowledge, calm nerves, and an instinct for how cold felt rather than measured. And if you got it wrong, you might not be publicly flogged, but you could be politely exiled to the garden staff, never again to step foot near a pomegranate syrup pot. A fate worse than warm milk. You pause at the entrance of the dome. The air inside smells faintly of citrus and clay. A few clay bowls rest on a stone shelf, their contents covered with linen and tucked in straw. No guards, no drama, just peace. But this same structure may have once held the winning dish at a banquet that ended in marriage proposals, trade deals, or whispered jealousy. You run a hand along the curved wall. It's cool to the touch. Not icy, not sharp, just cool. Like the feeling of slipping into a cotton sheet after a long, hot day. You realize now that ice was more than survival. It was storytelling. Each dessert served cold whispered something about the person offering it. I'm clever. I'm prepared. I'm connected. I can summon winter, even when the world burns around me, and when two noble families both had the same idea. Well, let the ice cream diplomacy begin. You step back outside, and the dome glows softly under the moon. Somewhere nearby, the faint notes of a reed flute float into the night. It's a lazy tune, full of spaces and silence, like even the music has decided to chill, and you smile at the ridiculousness of it all. Ancient feasts, cold deserts, prideful nobles, and poetic rivalries fought over rose-scented ice. It's a silly kind of genius, and it's exactly what makes this story worth remembering. The music fades into the background, and your footsteps find their way back toward the center of the village, now wrapped in a hush only found in the hours after dusk. The air continues to cool, slipping down your sleeves, brushing your ankles, like a cat just passing by. And in this quiet, your senses begin to sharpen to subtler things, textures, sense, even the smallest changes in light, which is perfect, because now you're about to experience one of the earliest known attempts at creamy, chilled perfection, some that might just be the first real ancestor of ghetto. Yes, tonight, we dive into the world of milk, saffron, and early ice cream. You step into a quiet courtyard. The entrance is low and humble, but inside, it's surprisingly elegant. A small stone pool in the center, mint growing in clay pots round the edges, and at the far end, a woman stirring something thick and golden in a copper pot over embers. She doesn't look up, but you hear the liquid in the pot making that slow, luxurious glop-glop sound that means it's almost ready. This is not a public treat. This is reserved for honored guests or family elders, usually prepared in the cooler parts of the day or night so that it could be stored quickly and eaten at the perfect moment of chill. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Persian cooks combined milk or cream with natural thickeners, like rice flour or starch, and flavored the mixture with saffron, cardamom, rosewater, and honey. These would then be slowly cooled in metal dishes set inside snow or ice-packed clay vessels. Like a primitive double freezer system, no hand cranks, no compressors, no popsicle molds, just insulation, patience, and really good aim with tongs. The woman pours the thick golden custard into a shallow bowl, polished brass, the kind that reflects moonlight in shimmering waves. She sets the bowl inside a larger clay jar filled with crushed ice and straw, then covers it with a thin cloth soaked in rosewater. You're watching the past make dessert in real time. And now for your quirky tidbit. In some households, a string of silver bells was tied to the dessert jars during cooling, not for security, but to help gauge the consistency. If the bells clinked too often when the bowl shifted, the mixture was still liquid. Once they were quiet for more than an hour, the custard had reached the right level of firmness. You can almost hear the silence now. This wasn't just dessert, it was a family ritual, a memory being made. The slow-cooked, chilled saffron milk was served in small portions, not to be devoured, but to be savored. Tiny bites, long pauses. People discussed poetry, the changing weather, the texture of the mint leaves. Someone recited lines about the moon. Someone else just sighed and ate more. You're handed a small brass spoon. The woman finally looks up and nods once, firmly, like a general releasing you into battle. You take your first bite. It's not like anything you know. Warm spices in a cold cream. It starts floral, shifts into earthy, then ends with a tiny tickle of sweetness on the back of your tongue. Not sugary, just perfect. And even more than the taste, it's the feeling, like the night itself has melted into something edible. Historians still argue whether this dish qualifies as ice cream. Some say it's more like kulfi or frozen custard. Others argue that since it involves chilling a dairy-based sweet mixture, it deserves honorary status in the frozen dessert family tree. There's even speculation that this early Persian delight inspired later versions in India, Turkey, and eventually Italy. But really, standing here with a chilled spoon in your hand and the moon sliding past overhead, does it matter? This is the kind of dessert that slows time. That makes you notice things like the exact sound the spoon makes when it clinks against the side of the bowl, or how the smell of saffron and mint makes your shoulders drop, or how the brass cools your fingers, even though the night air is already brushing your skin like a lullaby. You take another bite, slower this time, letting the flavors spread. The woman has gone back to her pot, stirring another batch with all the urgency of a cat watching clouds. This isn't about perfection. It's about process, about attention, about knowing how to take heat and turn it into grace. You finish the last of the custard and set your spoon gently in the bowl. No applause, no fanfare, just quiet, satisfied stillness. A moment perfectly kept cold, then perfectly gone. You thank the woman with a soft bow, and she nods once more, already preparing. The next round, somewhere behind you, a door creaks open, and another guest steps into the courtyard, lured by the same gentle pull of saffron and story, and you walk back out into the cool night, no longer surprised that ice cream existed in the desert 1,000 years ago. What surprises you now is how human it feels, how recognizable, how close, because at the end of the day, frozen milk and saffron aren't just a treat, they're a reminder. Even in the hottest places, people always find a way to cool down. You walk slowly now, each step measured, like your thoughts have softened to match the rhythm of the night. The air is crisp but not biting, just cool enough to make your breath barely visible, trailing behind like a wisp of incense. In the distance, a low murmur rises, not bustling, not loud, more like ceremonial whispers carried on the wind. Curious, you follow the sound. It leads you to a broad, stone-lined terrace overlooking the valley. A Zoroastrian gathering is in progress, though it's more of a meditation than a festival. Men and women in white robes stand in a circle, hands clasped or raised, faces lit by a single ceremonial fire flickering in a bronze bowl. The flame dances slowly, as if aware of its own sacredness. But what catches your eye isn't the fire. It's the large clay dishes placed on a stone altar nearby, bowls of chilled desert, carefully arranged like offerings. You're witnessing an ancient ritual where even ice cream played a sacred role. Yes, in ancient Persia, the sacred and the sweet sometimes met under the same stars. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Zoroastrian rituals often included food offerings, not just bread or wine, but milk, honey, fruit, and even chilled dishes when possible, especially during summer solstice ceremonies, where the fire's warmth was contrasted with the coolness of the earth's gifts. And what better symbol of balance than ice in the desert? As part of certain festivals, snow or ice harvested from yachtals was used to cool ceremonial milk or yogurt drinks, offered to priests or placed beside fire altars to honor the balance of elements, heat and cold, fire and water, discipline and indulgence. The offering wasn't just to deities, it was to nature itself, in gratitude for the rare alignment that allowed such luxuries to exist. The participants speak softly, chanting verses from the Avesta, the sacred Zoroastrian text. Their voices are low and rhythmic, like the desert breathing. As the chant ends, one elder steps forward and ladles a chilled yogurt mixture into small cups. It's simple, just fermented milk, rosewater, mint, and a few shavings of ice, but it's treated with reverence. Each participant receives a portion. Each cup is cupped in two hands. No one gulps. Everyone sips. You're invited to join. No title, no ceremony, just a small nod from an elder with sun-lined eyes and a remarkably modern smile. You take the cup. The first sip is startling cool, tart, floral, not dessert, not drink something in between. It tastes like clarity, like waking up after a long nap and remembering exactly where you are. Here's your quirky moment. One account from a 10th century Persian text describes how, during certain rites, priests would place snow in a bronze bowl and swirl it with saffron, not to eat, but to inhale its scent as a way to calm the spirit. The chill wasn't for the tongue, it was for the soul, a kind of icy incense. Historians still argue whether such uses of cold food in rituals were widespread or confined to specific temples and regions. Some scholars claim the practice was symbolic, a gesture of devotion through sacrifice of effort. After all, transporting ice is no joke. Others believe it had practical roots, cooling the body before meditation, or preserving certain dairy-based offerings before sunrise rituals. But as you stand there now, sipping your chilled drink beneath the open stars, it all feels perfectly natural. The flame on the altar flickers again, this time catching your eye. You notice the reflection of the fire in the surface of the yogurt, heat mirrored in cold. The symbolism writes itself. You begin to understand why the Zoroastrians, whose entire worldview is built around asterisk, duality, light and dark, truth and illusion, flame and frost asterisk would incorporate something as physically and philosophically satisfying as ice. And it's not just about temperature, it's about intention. Every bowl chilled before sunrise was an act of foresight. Every dome constructed in spring was a promise made to summer. Every ladle of faluda served at a solstice gathering was a quiet reminder that luxury, even when earned by fire and sweat, can still be approached with reverence. You finish your cup and set it gently on the altar. The elder gives you another small nod, then turns away. The group has already begun to disperse, some chatting quietly, others walking toward the village lanterns now being lit one by one. No one is in a hurry. You take one last glance at the altar. The flame is low now, almost invisible, but beside it, in the bowl of saffron yogurt and ice, the moon shimmers like a coin at the bottom of a well. You walk away without looking back, because some moments don't need remembering. They're already part of you. You step back onto the stone path, feet padding softly along a trail that seems to guide you with its own quiet will. The village is hushed now. The clatter of pots, the babble of children, even the soft gossip of neighbors has been replaced by the kind of silence that only happens when everyone agrees not to disturb the night. And yet, not everyone sleeps. Just ahead, through a cracked wooden gate, you glimpse a flickering lamplight. You peer inside and discover something both entirely ordinary and completely surprising. A woman hunched over a row of ceramic jars, sniffing, tapping, inspecting. Not a priestess, not a noble, just a householder. Checking for spoilage, because even in a world of yakchuls and snow couriers, things still went bad. You watch as she opens a jar of milk yogurt, dips in a wooden spoon, and tastes. She frowns, sets it aside. Another jar. This one holds a rose petal syrup. She stirs, listens to the sound it makes, and sniffs. This one passes. She hums softly to herself, a tune that feels older than the dome you were standing on hours ago. Tonight's chapter: spoilage and ancient food safety. Not glamorous, not royal, but absolutely vital. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Persians relied heavily on visual, tactile, and olfactory cues to check for spoilage. They didn't have pH strips or expiration labels. What they had was experience knowing how mint-infused yogurt should smell after 3 days in a cool jar, or how saffron custard should feel when stirred at midnight. And yes, there were failures. Some texts from the Safavid period describe how entire batches of milk would curdle too quickly, especially during unusually warm nights. Others tell of misjudged cooling times, desserts that turned grainy, yogurts that split, or syrups that fermented too fast. Spoilage wasn't just a nuisance, it was an insult to the cook, a possible risk to health, and, in some households, a mark of shame. Now, here's your quirky tidbit. Some cooks, in an effort to hide a failed batch, would add extra saffron or rosewater to disguise the scent. Others simply blamed the weather, or more dramatically, the wind spirits, claiming that a jealous breeze had cursed the milk. Somehow, blaming the wind always helped. And if the spoiled item had been prepared for guests or an offering, oh, the drama. You'd see a sudden call for dates instead of custard, or perhaps someone accidentally knocked the whole tray over before it could be tasted. A tragic loss, truly. The guests would nod solemnly and help themselves to grapes. Historians still argue about how widespread food safety rituals were across different classes. Did village cooks use the same standards as palace chefs? Were there regional variations in storage or preservation techniques? Some scholars argue for detailed oral traditions passed through generations. Others suggest it was trial, error, and a nose finely tuned to disaster. Back in the courtyard, the woman finishes her inspection. She discards 2 jars, wraps the rest in cloth, and nestles them in a shaded corner lined with cool bricks. It's not dramatic, it's not glamorous, but it's the foundation of everything you've seen so far. The yakshel might preserve, but someone still has to check. And it's not just about food, it's about care. You realize now how deeply the Persians valued stewardship. Cooling the milk wasn't enough. Someone had to stay up late to make sure it hadn't turned sour. Making faluda wasn't just a skill, it was a commitment to timing, to patience, to listening for that exact moment when the syrup was cold enough, but not frozen through. It wasn't science in the modern sense, but it was attention. thoughtfulness, a form of love disguised as routine. You sit for a moment near the gate, watching as the woman rinses her hands in a small bowl of lavender water. She doesn't glance at you, but she doesn't need to. You're just another shadow in the night, and this rhythm is far older than your presence. And slowly, you start to think about how even now, centuries later, thousands of miles away, we still do the same things. We open the fridge and sniff the milk, we poke the yogurt, we give the rice a suspicious look. Technology changes, but instinct stays. And maybe, when you do that tomorrow morning, you'll think of her, the woman in the desert, holding a spoon, trusting her nose more than any thermometer. You rise to leave, stepping softly back onto the road. Behind you, the lamplight dims. A lid is fitted over the final jar. The wind picks up again, tugging gently at your sleeve, like a toddler asking to be carried. You don't resist. You walk into the dark, content in the knowledge that even in the oldest corners of the earth, someone was always awake, making sure the ice didn't melt and the yogurt didn't turn. Because comfort, you've come to realize, is a full-time job. You move along the moonlit trail, the air whispering past with that soft rustle only found in places where stone meets sand and everyone else is already asleep. Lamps are out, doors are closed. Even the stray cats have curled themselves into woven baskets. But as you turn the corner, you're greeted by something quietly domestic and surprisingly cheerful. A woman squatting beside a stone ledge, churning yogurt. She doesn't look up, her hands are full, but the rhythmic schluck-sluck of the ladle moving through the clay pot makes you pause. There's no crowd, no ceremony, no saffron-infused drama, just one person, a jar, and a slow, practiced motion. You settle nearby, at the edge of a cool wall, watching without speaking. Tonight, you're seeing the everyday side of the yakchul, where it meets the hands of those who use it, not to impress guests or honor rituals, but to make breakfast. Here's your mainstream historical fact. While yakchuls served the royal and the rich, they were also used by everyday people to store dairy products like milk, yogurt, and soft cheeses, especially in desert towns where a lack of refrigeration could spoil food in mere hours. Many village families had access to communal yakchuls, or smaller family-built ones, constructed with the same principles, but scaled down for household use. You're watching one of these in action now. Earlier in the day, the woman brought fresh milk from her goats, boiled it, cooled it, and added a bit of old yogurt as a starter. Then, after leaving it to ferment inside the yakchul's cool chamber for a few hours, she brought it back out to churn gently, breaking the curds, thickening the texture, and preparing it for storage, or serving, or both. And here's your quirky detail. In some regions, earthen pots used to ferment yogurt were partially buried in cool, shaded courtyards and even wrapped in damp cloth, allowing the natural evaporative cooling to further slow spoilage. Think of it as a miniature yakchul wearing a wet shawl. She stops churning for a moment and lifts the lid. A soft hiss escapes, a signal that the yogurt is alive, quietly transforming under the surface. She dips in a finger, tastes it, nods, and goes back to work. This isn't cooking, it's tending, like you'd tend a fire, or a memory. You start to notice the other details now. A small bowl of fresh mint leaves, waiting to be stirred in. A bundle of lavash flatbread wrapped in cloth, still warm from the afternoon oven. A plate of sliced cucumbers resting beside a bowl of pale, cloudy ice water, gathered earlier from the yakchul just before sunset. She's preparing breakfast before dawn because, in places like this, the morning starts early, before the sun becomes a problem. And cold yogurt, mixed with mint and cucumber, served with flatbread, and perhaps a spoonful of sour cherry syrup. It's not just nourishing, it's cooling, strategic, delicious, practical, beautiful. You sit quietly, listening. As the churn softens to a lazy spiral, the air smells faintly of clay, mint, and the slow chemistry of milk becoming something better. Historians still argue about how widespread these everyday uses of yakchuls truly were. Some believe only the wealthier households could maintain them year-round. Others argue that neighborhood yakchuls were common in small towns and functioned like a shared refrigerator, maintained communally and watched over by a rotating roster of caretakers. Some families even passed down ice time like landure, allotted hours inside. Your share of frozen water. Regardless of the logistics, one thing is clear: cold was not taken for granted. Every scoop of yogurt pulled from a chilled jar, Every ladle of cool water poured over barley, these were moments of gratitude, not routine. And you begin to understand something subtle but powerful. Luxury isn't always about excess. Sometimes it's about timing. Like having cold yogurt ready before the heat arrives. The woman finishes churning and begins to pour the thickened mixture into smaller jars, some to be eaten fresh, others to rest overnight in the yakchal's belly. She hums softly as she works, not a song you recognize, but one with the rhythm of reassurance, of everything is ready, of tomorrow will begin smoothly. And in this moment, you envy her, not for her tools, or her technique, or even her yogurt, but for her relationship with the world, with temperature, with time. She doesn't race the heat, she plans for it, she dances with it, and in doing so, she makes space for stillness. You rise gently and give a small nod. She returns it with a smile that needs no translation. The kind of smile that says, yes, this is ordinary, and that's why it's perfect. As you walk away, you pass a clay cup resting near the edge of the courtyard. It's half full. You glance around. No one claims it. So you lift it, cold minty, quietly sour, delicious. You sip slowly, then place the cup back where you found it, and somewhere, in the darkness, a breeze stirs, not strong, not dramatic, just enough to say, well done, now go rest. You head back toward the edge of the village, tracing familiar steps, but now your body feels different, looser, like your joints have slowly melted into the rhythm of this place. Everything has softened. The sand underfoot is cooler now, almost velvety. Even the stars above seem more relaxed, leaning on the sky like spectators leaning on a balcony. And just ahead, flickering in a tucked-away square, is something unexpected. A group of men looking old, and somewhere in between, gathered around a low table, arguing about ice. Not fighting, not shouting, just ... debating. The way philosophers might argue, over the nature of truth, or merchants over the best figs in his... Only tonight's topic is who owns the coldest scoop in town. You step closer. The scene is lit by a few oil lamps and one very enthusiastic lantern tied to a fig tree. The men sit cross-legged on woven mats, bowls of half-melted Faluda in front of them. The talk is rapid, good-natured, and delightfully petty. Welcome to ice politics. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In regions where ice was a limited resource, its distribution and access could become a surprisingly political matter. While communal yakshals existed, they were often managed by local authorities, guilds, or temple officials, and ice rights weren't always evenly distributed. Some families received priority, especially during droughts or heat waves. Others had to wait or pay. Tonight's conversation is echoing those exact dynamics. One man insists that his cousin's uncle's neighbor always gets first pick from the freezing basin. Another accuses someone of bribing a yakshal keeper with extra walnuts. Someone else swears he once saw a merchant trading silk for not even good silk, just the thin stuff. And here's your quirky nugget. In some towns, ice disputes were settled with poetry contests. No joke. Rather than duel or call the magistrate, rival households would host poetry nights. Whoever recited the most beautiful, original, or biting verse about coldness, sweetness, or heat would win the right to an extra ice portion that week. Think of it as a rap battle, but for popsicles. Historians still argue how common these poetic showdowns were. Some think they were rare and ceremonial. Others believe they were part of everyday neighborhood life. What's certain is that access to ice created social friction, and that friction was often resolved with creativity, not conflict. You sit quietly at the edge of the group, enjoying the banter. Someone offers you a half-full bowl of icy rosewater, noodles. You accept it without hesitation. The texture is just right, slightly slushy, cool but not sharp. The flavor floats somewhere between floral and nostalgic. Someone makes a snarky comment about a rival's Faluda being as warm as bathwater, and laughter erupts. But underneath the jokes, you sense something else. The cold isn't just refreshing its reputation. To be known as the man with the coldest dessert in summer. That's status. That's influence. That's my family eats last, but we eat cool. One of the older men, bearded and quiet until now, finally speaks. He tells a story about the time he almost lost a block of mountain ice because a donkey got spooked by thunder and dumped the crate in a ravine. But did I panic? He says, eyes twinkling. Of course I panicked. It was 30 dirhams of cold. The group howls. The younger men nudge each other like they've heard the story 100 times. And yet, they let him finish, because cold stories are worth retelling. You're reminded of something profound in all this silliness. Ice, in this world, meant more than temperature. It meant foresight, connection, resources, timing. A bowl of Falooda wasn't just dessert, it was proof you knew how to prepare for heat before it arrived. And maybe, just maybe, it was a reminder that even in harsh places, joy finds a way. You sip the last bit of syrup from your bowl. Someone across the circle starts reciting a verse. In summer's grip, the saffron weeps, but rosewater dreams in icy deeps. The moon forgets the sun's harsh sting when noodles freeze and sparrows sing. A beat of silence. Then someone mutters, "Too soft." Laughter again. You rise quietly, leaving the group to their bickering and bowls. Your heart strangely light. Not because of the dessert though that helped, but because you've now seen every layer of cold in this land. Ritual, luxury, daily life, and yes, even bragging rights. You step away into the night. The breeze lifts your robe like a curtain and carries you forward. And somewhere behind you, another bowl is passed around. Asterisk, the path is winding now, no longer paved. Just a soft corridor of dust pressed smooth by centuries of sandaled feet. You walk with a quiet confidence, as though the village has accepted you into its sleepy fold. Behind you, the sound of laughter fades like an echo in syrup. Before you, nothing but the moon and your own steady steps. But up ahead, past a crumbling wall and a rusted gate that no longer closes, you find something truly rare, an abandoned yakchal. It stands alone, its dome cracked near the top, like it once tried to yawn and got stuck halfway. Vines have climbed partway up its side, and the lower stones are chipped, weather-worn, flecked with lichen. But it still holds shape. It still stands. You approach slowly, unsure if you're trespassing on history or on silence. The entrance is partially buried, but the gap is just large enough to duck through. You step inside, brushing past a crooked doorframe, and suddenly, you're enveloped in cool air, still preserved like a memory. It smells like damp clay, pepper, and faintly like time. There's nothing here now. No jars, no ice, just dust, dry leaves, and the soft hush of air still moving through vents, designed centuries ago. It hits you, standing there. This was once part of the pulse of the village, a place where young boys carried baskets of ice, where mothers cooled bowls of yogurt, where scribes waited for mint syrup to firm so it could be served at poetry readings. And now, it's quiet, not ruined, just ... paused. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Over time, many yakshals fell out of use due to changing climates, political shifts, and the introduction of modern refrigeration. As trade routes evolved and electricity reached the villages, coal stopped being a miracle and became a commodity, a switch, a hum, a bill. And with that, some yakshals, especially those in more remote or politically unstable areas, were gradually abandoned. But here's the quirky part. Rather than demolish them, locals often just left them alone. The structures were so sturdy, so inert, that tearing them down would be more trouble than it was worth. Instead, they became part of the landscape, goat shelters, bird sanctuaries, or places to sneak away for an afternoon nap. One tale even tells of a runaway bride hiding in an old yakchal for 3 days, only to be found out when the village dogs followed the scent of rose syrup. Historians still argue over whether these abandoned domes should be seen as relics or living spaces. Some argue for full preservation, treating them as architectural marvels. Others argue for practical reuse, turning them into art galleries, museums, or even climate-conscious icehouses. Again, especially as interest in sustainable cooling methods resurges, you reach the center of the chamber. It's perfectly circular. The air is cooler here, even without ice, and you realize the structure is still working. No one has tended it in years, but it remembers its purpose. It hasn't forgotten how to chill, like a retired musician still able to hum in tune. You sit down on a broken stone ledge and look up. Through the cracked dome, a sliver of stars winks at you, and you imagine what this space looked like in its prime, filled with jars, laughter, smells of mint and honey. The rhythmic sound of sandals scraping against stone as someone descended to check the temperature of a carefully stored dessert. You imagine being the last person to use this dome ceiling, the final jar, muttering a prayer to the wind and walking out, not knowing it would be decades before anyone returned. And somehow, That makes this place sacred. It's a monument not to innovation, but to consistency. Two simple, quiet systems that didn't need constant tweaking. The actual didn't demand electricity, didn't beep, didn't update firmware. It just worked. For centuries, because someone understood the desert well enough to listen to it. You run your palm along the inner wall. It's smoother here, as if hundreds of hands have polished it by sheer habit. You close your eyes and take a breath. Still cool, still safe, still ready. And you realize, even in its silence, this old dome is teaching something. Something about patience, about structures that serve, even when no one is watching. You stand, bow your head slightly, not from superstition, just respect, and step back into the night. The stars above are still there, so is the breeze, but something inside you is quieter. Now, you leave the old yakchal behind, but not forgotten, because some places don't stop working, they just wait. The night is deep now, dark in that rich, velvety way that only happens far from streetlights and glowing screens. You walk slowly, not because you're tired, but because the world has become so soft. Footsteps feel like whispers. Even your breath seems to float rather than fall. You reach a stone archway tucked behind an almond grove. Beyond it lies a walled garden, not grand, not royal, but precisely arranged. You smell orange blossoms, basil, wet earth, and something sweet. Inside, a narrow path leads past fountains and fruit trees, their branches low with ripening apricots and figs. At the far end of the garden sits a long bench carved from pale sandstone. A tray rests there, holding glasses of chilled pomegranate juice, each one beaded with condensation under the moonlight. Welcome to the world of Persian garden design, where nature, architecture, and refrigeration all meet to create something, not just beautiful, but perfectly temperate. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Persian gardens, or paradisef, from which we get the word paradise, were more than just pretty places. They were designed with microclimates in mind. The layout of trees, water channels, qanats, shaded walls, and elevated walkways all serve to cool the air, trap breezes, and reduce heat by several degrees. You sit down beside the tray and lift one of the glasses. The pomegranate juice is chilled, not icy, but crisp, enough to wake your tongue gently. You sip slowly. The taste is dark, sharp, and slightly floral. You wonder who left it here, but deep down you already know, someone who understands how to make coolness part of daily life nearby. A small fountain gurgles from a stone spout. Its water flows along narrow grooves etched into the tiles, designed to run past seated guests, cooling their feet and ankles as they talked, dined, or drifted off. Some scholars believe certain garden layouts were specifically measured to enhance airflow, guiding breezes across damp stone to create natural evaporative cooling. But here's your quirky discovery. During particularly hot months, ice harvested from yakchals was used to chill entire fountains or stone basins in elite gardens. Servants would lower blocks into the water before guests arrived. One account even describes a midsummer party where frozen melon slices were floated in the stream, drifting lazily past seated guests like edible lotus flowers. Historians still argue about how common this practice was. Some say it was reserved for the court or nobility. Others suggest it was more widespread in merchant households that could afford to store ice. What's certain is that the presence of chilled water in a garden was a status symbol and a sign of deep environmental fluency. You lean back against the cool bench. The stone has been kissed by night air, and it welcomes your spine like an old friend. You close your eyes briefly. The fountain's rhythm is slow, meditative, like a lullaby translated into water. This isn't luxury. It's designed for well-being. It's cooling as an act of hospitality. The Persians didn't just fight the heat, they designed around it, creating environments where the body could relax, the mind could soften, and the soul could exhale. Even the plants were chosen for scent and shade. Jasmine to calm the nerves, basil to cool the skin, cypress to block wind and hold form, and pomegranate, always pomegranate, for both taste and symbolism, bitterness and sweetness in one fruit. A reminder that contrast is part of the balance. You sip again, and this time you taste the balance. The juice is slightly sour, but not unpleasant. It reminds you that not everything cold has to be sweet. Sometimes, chill itself is the treat. You watch a moth drift lazily past the lantern, its wings flickering like loose silk. Somewhere in the garden, a bird stirs in its sleep. A dry fig falls with a gentle thump onto the grass. Nothing rushes here. You imagine being a guest in this garden, 1,000 years ago, perhaps in long robes, reclining on cushions, sipping cold yogurt drink while a poet read verses about the moons, loneliness, and the way mint leaves float. You wouldn't ask for ice. It would simply appear. Expected, but never ordinary. And the coolest part of all, you wouldn't even notice the effort. The cooling would happen quietly, invisibly, through design, through planning, through knowing where to place a wall, when to pick a tree, and how to let water do the work. You take your final sip, set the glass back on the tray, and rise slowly. The garden doesn't need your praise. It knows it's done its job. Asterisk. You leave the garden the way you came, the stone archway swallowing your footsteps like a page being gently turned. The desert is cool now, not just less hot, but genuinely refreshing, as though the land itself is exhaling. Somewhere in the distance, a donkey brays once, then goes quiet, as if realizing how late it is. And now, with your hands loose and your breath slow, you're about to discover a dish that lets you eat the seasons, a culinary trick that allowed ancient Persians to taste spring in the middle of summer. It's quiet as you enter the next courtyard. This one is tucked between high mud brick walls, with a roof of woven reeds and bundles of herbs strung up to dry like lazy wind chimes. At its center, a woman kneels beside a wooden box layered with straw and a cloth-lined tray of preserved sour cherries, crushed violets, and wild plum paste. Everything is cold, not frozen, not fresh, but captured, suspended. She doesn't speak, just gestures for you to sit, and hands you a small bowl. Inside, a delicate cube of something translucent, speckled with flower petals, and dusted with sugar, so fine it looks like it's been kissed by morning frost. You take a bite, and suddenly, you're eating a meadow. The flavors are faint but clear: mint, rose, violet, cherry, thyme. Cooling, but not in temperature alone. It cools you from the inside out, like stepping into the shade after hours in the sun. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Persians preserved seasonal fruits and flowers in syrups, honeys and vinegars, then chilled them in yakshells to extend their shelf life. These were served not just as snacks or sweets, but as medicinal refreshments, meant to balance the body's heat during specific seasons according to humoral theory, the ancient belief that food could correct internal imbalances. And here's your quirky little joy. One summer tradition involved freezing infused floral waters into delicate crystals and mixing them with lemon and honey, a precursor to the modern snow cone, but described in Persian poetry as drinking the memory of April. Some even flavored snow with aged vinegar and crushed herbs for an icy pickled slush. Refreshing, arguably, acquired taste, most definitely. You glance around the courtyard. On a high shelf, more bowls are arranged in order, one with candied quince, another with rosapole compote, a third filled with something dark and glossy saffron dates soaked in jasmine syrup, each one preserved, then chilled, then gently thawed. The woman beside you picks up a small jar and opens the lid. Inside is a jam of damask rose petals, preserved with citrus and snow from last winter. She spoons a bit into a second bowl, adds a drizzle of lemon, and hands it to you without a word. You taste it. You don't smile. You close your eyes. It's quiet, soft, something between perfume and memory, something that reminds you that time doesn't have to move fast. Historians still argue how widespread these practices were outside the major cities. Some say only the elite preserved delicacies in cold domes. Others point to evidence of middle-class families developing small-scale seasonal preservation techniques like burying clay pots near garden walls where the shade lingered longer. Regardless, the message is the same. The Persians knew how to trap time in food, and that's what you're eating now. Not just a dessert, but a moment, captured and chilled, then passed forward from a cooler month to a warmer one. A bit of spring, unearthed in August, a gift from someone long gone to someone just arriving. You look at the woman. Her eyes are tired but kind. She places a cloth over the box of treats, gently patting it as if tucking in a sleeping child. Then, she pours herself a small glass of chilled mulberry tea and sips in silence. You do the same, because what else is there to say? You've eaten spring in the desert, and for now that's enough. You leave the quiet gathering behind, carrying with you the warmth of laughter, the cool of stone, and the crispness of mint in your throat. It's late now, not midnight, but something softer, that unmeasured moment between awareness and sleep. Your path leads toward the far edge of the village, where the lights are few and even the stars seem to whisper instead of shine. And it's here, in the shadows beyond the glow, that you begin to notice the ones who rarely get noticed at all. The ice laborers. Soft thok echoes from behind a mud brick wall. You follow it, careful not to intrude. You peek around the corner, and there they are, 2 men and a boy, hunched beside a cart loaded with ice wrapped in straw mats. The cart is half empty. Their hands are raw, their tunics are damp, and they are smiling. You've seen the desserts, you've seen the ceremonies, but this is the hidden muscle of the cold. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Producing and transporting ice in ancient Persia was labor-intensive and deeply physical. The process required people to rise before dawn, work in cold and heat alike, and move hundreds of pounds of frozen water, whether from mountain roots or local freezing basins, to the Yakchil before the sun claimed it. And while the nobles dined on chilled custards, it was these workers who made it possible. They were known by different names depending on the region. Barfbada, Yakrabat. They all shared the same rhythm: early mornings, sore arms, and a quiet pride that didn't need to be spoken. One of the men wipes his brow with a cloth that used to be white. The boy, maybe 12, is scraping bits of ice off the base of the cart with a wooden paddle, not to waste it but to collect every last sliver for cooling drinking jars at home. And here's your quirky gem. In some villages, laborers were paid, not just in coin, but in fruit, cloth, or ironically sips of the very chilled drinks they helped make possible. A sort of unofficial first taste. Some even carried their own clay cups, carved with personal symbols or family initials, to dip discreetly into the storage jars before delivering them to wealthier homes. Historians still argue whether these workers were free tradesmen, hired hands, or sometimes seasonal servants tied to larger estates. Evidence varies by region. In some places, transporting ice was a respected seasonal craft. In others, it was grueling work left to those without land or title. But everyone agrees, on this, without them, none of the chill happened. The older man stretches his arms, bones popping quietly in the night. He leans against the wall, breathing deeply, the way someone does when they're finally done doing something hard. The boy rests beside him, holding a shard of ice to his cheek, and giggling at the cold. You sit across from them on a flat rock. No words are needed. They're too tired to explain. And you're here to witness, not to interfere. The work isn't glamorous. It never was. But you can see the rhythm of it, the cartwheels etched into the dust, the straw curling in loops like ancient calligraphy, the tiny rivulets of meltwater glistening like silver threads in the moonlight. They don't talk about technique, they don't quote poetry about how cold soothes the soul. They just move ice day after day, dawn after dawn. They do it because it's needed, because it matters, because someone must carry the weight of coolness so others can savor the lightness. And that's the truth behind every sweet bite you've tasted so far. It was earned by hands like these. You reach into your satchel and pull out a leftover sliver of dried apricot, barely anything, but sweet and soft. You offer it. The boy accepts, eyes wide. He chews slowly, savoring the sugar like it's saffron. And suddenly, you realize he's never had faluda. Not once. He's helped deliver the ice. He's even pressed the straw around the bowls. But the dessert itself, that's not for him, not yet. But maybe someday. You rise slowly, giving a nod that says more than thanks. The older man tips his head back, closes his eyes, and hums just once like a lullaby meant only for the air. And you walk on, reminded that even in a story full of architecture, astronomy, and aromatic herbs, it's the quiet laborers, the strapped hands, the chapped fingers, the bare feet on cold stone, who made it all real. The wind has shifted. It's cooler now, not because night has deepened, but because you've entered the coldest part of the story. Not the literal coldest, though the air does nip gently at your skin. This kind of cold is intentional, chosen, a quiet art. You walk past a shuttered tea shop and into a long, narrow street lined with shuttered stalls. There's one still open. Its doors aren't wide, but there's a faint glow spilling out. You follow it inside. There's nothing extravagant, just a single oil lamp, a few low shelves, and jars. Lots of them. Jars of dried fruit, flour, syrup, spice blends, and something far more surprising. Books, not leather tomes or scrolls. These are thinner, newer bound pages with hand-drawn diagrams, charts, and the kind of detailed sketches that suggest engineering, not poetry. You've stepped into the home of someone who's made a life of studying cold. A man sits cross-legged, on a mat, flipping through pages and muttering to himself, the way someone does when they're arguing with a sentence they wrote an hour ago. He looks up. He sees you. He smiles the way people smile when someone finally walks into the room and understands why it was built. Curious about how your fridge compares to mine, he asks. And with that, you're seated. The lamp burns brighter. He pours you a cup of cool barley tea, the clay cup sweating in your hand, and you begin what can only be called a side-by-side comparison. Ancient refrigerator versus modern fridge. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Yakchal, developed over 2,000 years ago, was a marvel of passive refrigeration. It required no electricity, no moving parts, and relied solely on insulation, airflow, and seasonal timing. Meanwhile, your modern fridge hums constantly, uses electricity, and depends on chemical refrigerants like Freon or its newer, greener cousins. And here's your quirky truth. Despite all our advances, modern engineers still study Yakchals for inspiration. Architects have incorporated Yakchal-style domes into green building designs in places like India, Iran, and even California, seeking to harness passive cooling in a time when energy costs and climate change demand new solutions from old ideas. The man in front of you gestures to one of his hand-drawn cross-sections. It shows the cone shape of a Yakchal, labeled with airflow indicators, insulation, thickness, and shadow arcs from sun movement over the seasons. There's even a note in the margin that reads, "Does the dome listen to the stars?" You ask if he's an architect. He shrugs. "I'm a librarian who never forgot how good the yogurt tasted when my grandfather stored it in the dome." He pulls out a second diagram, a sketch of a modern refrigerator. Straight lines, compressor coils, thermostat sensors, a box that pushes cold in every direction at once, mechanical and oblivious. You see the difference? He asks. You think, for a moment, then say, "The Yakchal doesn't T-force anything. It allows." As he grins, points at you with the ink-stained tip of his finger. Exactly. Historians still argue whether the principles behind Yakchals influenced Western cooling architecture. Some believe knowledge traveled via trade routes to Rome, Egypt, and later Andalusia, eventually seeding the vault cooling systems of medieval wine cellars. Others argue the inspiration was parallel, not shared different answers to the same question. How do you make cold where cold doesn't want to exist? But right now, the only thing that matters is this. The old ways worked, not just for the elite, not just for ceremonies, but for households, villages, communities, and not just to preserve food, but to preserve calm. You sip your tea. It's not ice cold, but it's cool enough to taste clarity. The man gestures to a final sketch, a modern home built with passive cooling in mind. Clay walls, shade trees, underground channels, and yes, a Yakchal-style dome out back. You don't need to live in the past, he says, but the past might be better at living than we are. You leave quietly after that, your head buzzing with diagrams and dates, and the sound of his pen scratching across pages. Not noise, not burden, just the gentle thrum of a mind devoted to a kind of wisdom that doesn't melt outside the wind. Catches your sleeve again, and you realize you've just been reminded that cold can be gentle, that refrigeration doesn't have to be noisy, that some of the best engineering comes not from what we can force but from what we can listen to. The stars are brighter now. The moon is full and unapologetically pale. You close your eyes and imagine a dome that needs no electricity, no praise, and no updates. Just time, air, clay, and trust. You walk away from the scribe's little workshop, mind humming with sketches and quiet epiphanies. It's strange, the colder this story gets, the warmer you feel. The moonlight drapes everything in silver, and your feet take you along a low ridge where the village meets the open plain. The houses thin out, the noise, what little there was, is gone. And there, just beyond the last row of fig trees, you see a line of lanterns flickering along the path. You follow them, because now, you're about to see how Persian ice shaped the world, not just in domes or deserts, but in influence. The lanterns lead you toward a gathering of travelers seated beneath a low canopy, wrapped in wool cloaks and eating quietly around a brazier. Some are Persian, yes, but others are not. Their robes hint at distant cities, their words carry unfamiliar rhythms. There are traders from India, Bactria, Mesopotamia, maybe even North Africa, and on the cloth in front of them, cold things, a bowl of rice noodles in chilled honey, dried melon slices that crackle when bitten, a jug of spiced milk cooled in a shared ice pit, with cinnamon bark floating on top like a raft on a frozen sea. You've stumbled into a moment of cultural exchange, and at the heart of it is something utterly human, the sharing of temperature. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Persian ice technology, especially yachtals and wind catchers, influenced architectural cooling systems across Asia, North Africa, and even into parts of Europe. As trade routes expanded, travelers carried not just silk and saffron, but knowledge how to dig angled basins for freezing, how to shape domes to resist heat, how to harness wind as a tool instead of a threat. You sit quietly at the edge of the group, unnoticed but welcome. A man hands you a round of chilled yogurt flatbread wrapped around pickled herbs. It's tart and cooling, like air in your mouth. And here's your quirky gem of the night. In Mughal, India, Persian engineers helped build icehouses using imported yachtal techniques, even crafting frozen sorbet for emperors in the Delhi heat. In Spain, Moorish architects used wind towers and underground water channels inspired by Persian passive cooling. And in North Africa, similar domes, though simpler, popped up to preserve both food and grain, whispering of their Persian ancestors in shape and function. Historians still argue about how much of this was direct teaching versus independent development. Some say Persian engineers traveled with caravans, offering their services to kings and sultans alike. Others believe these techniques evolved in parallel each culture, figuring out its own clever way of staying chill. But tonight, under the canopy, there are no blueprints, no textbooks, just people passing bowls and stories, nodding at the moon, occasionally trading small pieces of ice like currency or apology. A man from Bactria explains how they pack snow in hemp sacks. A merchant from Basra shows off a copper bowl etched with swirling symbols said to improve airflow when set over ice. You begin to see the map in your mind, not of land, but of ideas. Tiny cool spots radiating outward from Persia, traveling like echoes to other empires, not with flags, not with armies, but with clay and lime and snow packed in straw. And with every culture that adopted the method, it changed a little. In India, the domes became flatter. In Egypt, the basins deeper. In Spain, they added lime whitewash to reflect heat. The designs evolved, but the soul stayed the same. To hold on to cold, long after the world should have taken it back. You sip from a bowl of chilled grape must, slightly fermented. It fizzes faintly on your tongue, like summer laughing in slow motion. One of the older men leans back, points to the stars, and tells a joke about an emperor who tried to freeze wine into jewels. It doesn't translate perfectly, but the group laughs anyway, because everyone here knows what it means to chase a cool moment, to bottle winter in a land ruled by sun. You think of the yachtal again, not just as a dome, but as an idea that refused to melt. And maybe that's why it spread so far, not because it was cheap, or fast, or flashy, but because it worked quietly, faithfully, repeatedly. You close your eyes and listen to the murmur of voices, the clink of bowls, the faint rustle of sand, shifting under centuries of feet, and you realize Persian cooling didn't conquer the world, it simply invited it to sit down and share a chilled drink. The lanterns flicker lower now, as if they, too, are growing sleepy. The travelers have begun to pack their satchels, fold their rugs, and toss the last embers of the brazier with a kind of practiced affection. You step away quietly, not out of politeness, but because something is pulling you forward. You're not just learning anymore. You're following the trail of how Persian cold wasn't just for celebration or empire or elegance, but for healing. You pass a row of shuttered apothecaries, their carved signs gently creaking in the breeze, a painted mortar and pestle, a hand holding a basil stem, a stylized snowflake. And then you find the place you didn't know you were looking for. A modest clay building set slightly apart from the others, half buried in sand, its entrance shaded by a torn canvas and a cluster of aloe plants. You duck inside. Immediately, the air is cooler, not in a dramatic way, no gust of frost or shimmering cold breath, but like the inside of a stone bowl left in the shade. You feel it in your elbows, in the back of your throat. It's the kind of cool that says, this is where people come to get better. Inside, a woman sits cross-legged on a cushion, mixing something in a copper bowl. She doesn't look up. She just says, Let me guess. Dry skin, heat rash, a little trouble sleeping. You laugh, softly, guilty. She gestures to a long shelf of small jars, each labeled with neat Persian script. Rosewater, sour plum, cucumber ash, vinegar, gel, iced chamomile paste. She picks up one and presses it into your palm. It's cool too. The touchstone, where thick-walled, still carrying the breath of the yakchul behind the clinic, and now you're in the world of Persian medicinal cooling. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In Persian medicine, rooted in the Unani system, illnesses were often treated by balancing internal and external temperaments. Heat was considered a cause of inflammation, anxiety, and imbalances, especially in the desert climates. So cooling remedies were central to the healing process. You dip 2 fingers into the jar. The cream is faintly green and smells of cucumbers, mint, and maybe a hint of lemon myrtle. You rub it gently into your wrist. It soothes almost immediately. The healer nods, satisfied. She takes out a cloth-wrapped bundle and opens it to reveal ice pebbles, small chunks of packed snow rolled in dried violet petals. She places 2 into a basin of water and lets them melt. For your eyes, she says. After walking all night, you lean forward and rinse your face with the cool, fragrant water. And just like that, the fatigue behind your eyes eases, as if your thoughts themselves are being chilled. Now for your quirky discovery. Some Persian clinics kept small amounts of yakchul ice, exclusively for medicine, not desserts. These were rationed carefully, used only in cases of high fever, skin eruptions, or mental unrest, what we might now call heatstroke, or even panic. One famous healer in the 9th century wrote of icing the pulse points of distressed patients with linen soaked in sour cherry snow to cool the heart and loosen the grip of fear. There are even records of ice used in surgery preparation, not as anesthesia, but to reduce swelling and calm nerves. And yes, there's some suggestion that elite women used frozen rosewater compresses as early skincare treatments, the world's first cold facials. Perhaps. Historians still argue about how widely available these methods were. Some say cooling remedies were a luxury of cities with large yakchuls. Others point to travelogues describing similar treatments in rural areas using natural cold deep shade, early morning dew, or clay pots kept in underground nooks. But what's clear is this: cold was part of care. You sip from a clay cup, the healer offers you iced licorice and cardamom infusion, faintly bitter and grounding. She doesn't hover. She returns to her mixing, letting you sit in silence. The room smells of crushed mint and old paper. A breeze moves lazily through the back vent. You realize you're not just being cooled, you're being slowed down, which might be the first step toward being healed. And you wonder how many people sat here before you. How many aching heads, overheated feet, restless hearts, all calmed not by incantation or medicine alone, but by the simple generosity of cold. You leave her a small coin, not because she asked, but because it feels right. She doesn't look up. She just says, "Drink something bitter tomorrow." Too much sweet makes the heat return. You step back into the night, and for a few steps, your shoulders feel lighter, your breath is smoother, and the stars overhead don't feel quite so far away. You're walking against lower now, as if the coolness on your skin has seeped all the way to your bones. You're not in a hurry. After all this time in the desert, you've learned that nothing useful happens quickly. The sky is shifting. There's a pale grey tint low on the horizon. Dawn is starting to whisper its way into the world, just loud enough to make the shadows blink. And just when you think you've seen it, Alice Palace's secret recipes, medicinal domes, you arrive at a low, circular structure ringed by rows of amphorae and small glass jars glowing faintly in the torchlight. A man sits on a raised mat, carving into a palm leaf scroll. He looks up, squints, then grins. "You're here for the last piece, aren't you?" And before you can answer, he adds, "Memory. That's the last gift of cold." You blink. He gestures for you to sit. You do. Because now, you're about to learn how ancient Persians used cold, not just to preserve food or heal the body, but to protect memories themselves. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In some ancient Persian libraries and archives, sealed cold rooms were used to store delicate scrolls, medicinal texts, and rare materials, particularly during the hottest months. Clay containers lined with pitch were cooled using yakchul ice, and entire storage basins were designed to sit in subterranean chambers. naturally insulated and stabilized by passive airflow. Why? Because some things can't be copied easily. Ink runs, fibers rot, stories disappear, and so cold became the quiet guardian of knowledge. You look around the chamber. Scrolls are nestled in clay tubes, some packed in straw, others labeled with small bronze plaques. There's a faint scent of frankincense, cedar oil, and old paper. You can almost hear the rustle of time. And now, your quirky little gem. In addition to text preservation, some ancient Persians believed that scent itself carried memory. Certain scholars, especially poets and herbalists, would store dried rose petals, orange blossoms, and crushed herbs in the same chambers as their manuscripts, believing that the cool dryness helped retain both aroma and inspiration. The scent was not decoration, it was mnemonic, a way to remember by breathing. One poet even claimed that he couldn't finish a line of verse unless the room still smelled like the violet wind of last Nowruz. Historians still argue about how widespread these cold archives were. Some evidence comes from royal courts where climate-controlled storage would be practical, but recent excavations in the Yazd region suggest smaller communities also buried vessels of medicinal recipes in shaded niches, protected from heat and time alike. Some were even found with charcoal tablets inside, likely used to absorb excess moisture. The man beside you opens a jar and lets you smell it. It's faint lavender ash and something like citrus rind. It's almost familiar. "That's from my grandmother's garden," he says softly. "I don't need to read her notes, I just open the jar." And that's when it clicks. Sometimes, cold isn't about freezing. It's about slowing long enough for the moment to stay, long enough to remember it as it really was, not as it faded. You ask him what's in the sealed amphora near the far wall. "Poetry," he says, "for generations worth. Some of it's terrible, but it's all we've got." You both laugh. The kind of laugh that holds something ancient and silly and a little sad. The man pours you a cup of cold saffron water. You sip it slowly. The flavor is faint but haunting, like sunlight frozen into tea. You lean back against the cool stone, and for a while you don't think, you just breathe and let the room hold you, because maybe that's what a yakshell really is. Not just an invention, but a decision that some things are worth keeping, even when the world is too hot, too fast, too forgetful. You rise at last and thank the man. He waves you off, already back to his carving. As you step out into the soft light of pre-dawn, your foot presses into the sand beside a half-buried clay jar. You brush it off. There's no label, but as you lift it, you catch the faintest scent, something like honey and thyme and cold stones after rain. And suddenly, a memory that's not yours but feels like it could be flashes gently into your mind. You set the jar back down. Some memories don't need to be opened, just preserved. You follow the soft edges of dawn, now not rushing, just allowing the light to stretch slowly across the sand, like a long-forgotten scroll unrolling itself in silence. Your path leads downward, toward the old irrigation canals, dry for the season, but still shaped and waiting. You walk along their curves, their dusty bottoms scattered with bird prints and a few stubborn weeds. The scent of earth rises with the first warmth, and up ahead, where the canal bends toward a low grove of date palms, you hear something. Laughter, but it's not a party, not a feast. It's the slow, meandering giggles of children at work. You approach quietly and find a small group of boys and girls barefoot, sun-kissed, maybe 9 or 10 gathered around a clay pit, half-shaded by woven reeds. One holds a long wooden paddle, another balances a small pot inside a larger bowl of shaved ice. They are making ice cream. You weren't expecting this. It's not the courtly kind, the elaborate dish laced with rosewater and silver leaf. This is the village version, less ornate, more joy. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In many parts of ancient Persia, ice cream wasn't limited to royal courts. While the most refined recipes were indeed luxuries, simpler versions using milk, fruit pulp, and cooled syrup were made in rural villages during summer festivals or children often helped churn the mixture by hand, using techniques passed down casually, one bowl inside another, with salt or ash used to extend the cold. The girl with the paddle stirs with serious intent, while another fans the outer bowl to keep the ice from melting too fast. It's clear they've done this before. A boy is in charge of guarding the shaved ice, which they've stored in a clay-lined basket buried in sand. beneath a fig tree. And here's your quirky little gem. In some communities, a local child's birthday or the first rain of the season was the signal to make the first batch of ice cream, often flavored with wild pistachio, tamarind, or mulberry paste. No molds, no perfect shapes, just sticky fingers and joy. You crouch beside the group, and one of the boys looks up. Want to taste it when it's ready? He asks, as if you'd say no. Historians still argue how widespread this practice was. Some claim village ice cream was a rare treat, made only when access to ice permitted. Others suggest that in well-established communities with year-round ice stores, simple chilled sweets were part of seasonal rhythms, especially in oasis towns and mountainous regions. But one thing no one debates: children were part of it. Always they learned how to crush herbs for syrup, how to stir without spilling, how to keep the clay bowl steady even when excitement made their hands tremble. You watch them for a while. One girl hums as she stirs a soft, looping tune that might be a lullaby or just something made up on the spot. A boy begins molding leftover ice into a tiny shape-an animal. Maybe no one stops him. The others just work around it, their pace easy but focused. You're handed a spoon carved from tamarisk wood. They pass the bowl. You take a bite. It's rough textured, a little icy, not what you'd call refined, but it's perfect. Sweetened with grape must and milk, chilled just enough to bite without pain, and somehow tasting like the morning itself, sunlight cooled by effort. They don't make a big deal out of it. No one cheers. No one takes a second bite before the others. Just shared spoons, sticky smiles, and a collective sigh. Then, as if on cue, they scatter. Back to parents, to goats, to school maybe. Whatever comes next. The bowls are left in the sand, glistening with the last of the melt. And for a moment, the world is still. You realize then that cold was never only about preservation. It was about movements, fragile, flickering, easily lost if not gently held. The children understood that, maybe better than anyone. You stand up, stretch slowly, and follow the path the kids took, footsteps fading behind you. There's nothing left to chill, nothing left to freeze, just one more memory, cooling into place. The sun is rising now, though it's doing so slowly, like even the sky is reluctant to bring this night to an end. The edges of the village begin to glow, not harshly, but with that warm apricot light that seems to exist only in desert mornings. You're not quite ready to say goodbye to the cold, to the stillness, to the echoes of footsteps long buried in sand. But there's one final stop. At the edge of the settlement, past a line of tall tamarisk trees, stands a solitary figure. He's old, but not fragile, his spine bent like the bow of a stringed instrument that's played 1,000 songs and still holds tension. He sees you coming and simply gestures behind him. You step forward, and there it is, the last yakchul. It's not the grandest, it's not the oldest, but it is still in use. Its conical form rises from the earth like a fossilized breath. Its bricks are weathered, chipped by decades of wind and sun, but the shape, the beautiful logic of it, intact. The man, who calls himself Dariosh, is the last caretaker. He doesn't speak much at first. He walks with you around the dome, occasionally knocking on the bricks with a practiced ear. The sound tells him what you cannot see, whether the wall is still whole, whether moisture has crept in, whether the silence within remains undisturbed. Here's your mainstream historical fact, even into the 20th century. Some yakchuls were still used in rural Iran and parts of Central Asia, while industrial refrigeration rendered many obsolete. A few were preserved as cultural heritage sites, and a very small number like this one remained active, cared for by aging stewards who remembered how to use them without notes, just as their parents had. Inside, the air is impossibly cool. It smells of lime, plaster, old straw, and time. Dariosh lights a small oil lamp, not to see by, but to show you that the flame barely flickers. The air here doesn't move unless invited. He opens a low clay door, and inside is what you've been journeying toward all this time. The last ice of the season, packed in woven mats, still dry, still whole, still cold. He reaches in and breaks off a fist-sized chunk. It cracks softly, like a promised. And now, your quirky fact. Every spring, before the final melt, Dariosh invites village elders to a quiet ceremony. They gather just before sunrise and melt a single piece of the last winter's ice in a bowl of bitter orange blossom tea. No music, no speeches, just a silent acknowledgement that winter has been held preserved, like a secret and is now being released. They call it Bargazashti Serdar, the return of the cold. 1. Historians still argue whether such traditions were widespread or local to specific tribes or communities. There's little written record of these intimate rituals, but oral histories from Yazd, Kerman, and even parts of eastern Anatolia describe similar events, moments where ice became not just a tool, but a symbol of endurance, of memory, and of the human will to hold on to something fleeting. Dariosh offers you the same tea. You sip it slowly. The taste is sharp, floral, cool, in a way that doesn't sting, but clears your mind. Like wiping condensation from a mirror, he doesn't ask where you came from, he doesn't ask what you've seen. He just says, if you leave before the sun reaches the bricks, the dome will remember you. You nod, and then he returns to his place beside the outer wall, sits cross-legged, and begins to hum a sound like the wind filtered through woven straw. You step outside, and look back at the Yakchel. The rising sun has just kissed the tip of its cone, and for a moment, the whole structure glows, like it's lit from within. You realize something important then. The cold wasn't the destination, it was the medium. What you really found here was stillness, slowness, and the ancient, defiant art of not rushing anything good, like ice under straw, like memory under silence, like peace at the end of a long, sleepy night. Asterisk, you begin the long, quiet walk back. There are no more surprises waiting for you, no hidden ice pits, no whispering scrolls, no fig trees hiding clay baskets, just the soft, golden hush of a world that has barely begun to stir. The village is behind you now, and ahead is only the horizon, spreading wide and shimmering faintly with heat that hasn't yet arrived. And yet, you're not leaving empty-handed. You carry something else, not ice, not herbs, not even a souvenir, but a weightless coolness that now lives inside you, a knowing, a steadiness. With each step, your mind gently drifts through the mosaic of moments you've collected, the ice blocks slowly rising from the underground pit, gleaming like glass beneath starlight, the artisans brushing rosewater over chilled pomegranate sorbet, like painters on an edible canvas, the scribe muttering over airflow diagrams, pausing only to sip his barley tea, the healer wrapping your wrist with mint paste, not because it hurt but because you'd walked too far without knowing how to stop, and the children swirling joy into cold milk, like alchemists who didn't need gold. You remember the questions just as vividly. How do you keep winter alive? In the middle of the desert, how do you preserve not just food or scrolls, but moments? How much of what we call progress is simply forgetting to look back? You've asked them all without needing to answer any of them, and that's the thing, isn't it? Cold isn't permanent. It isn't meant to be. The Yakchel teaches you that. It holds on just long enough to give you a season, a flavor, a breath of respite. Then it melts, silently, humbly, without complaint, and in doing so, it teaches the warmth how to be bearable. Now, here's your mainstream fact. Long after Yakchels faded from daily use, they remained a symbol in Persian literature, architecture, and even spirituality. In some traditions, the dome was a metaphor for the self-regulating solar place that could stay cool, no matter how fiercely the world burned outside. And your final quirky tidbit. One surviving Yakchel in Kerman was used not to store food, or ice at all in its later years, but love letters. Local teens, forbidden to meet, would sneak folded notes into the crevices between its bricks, believing the cold would keep their words fresh until the right hands could find them. Historians still argue whether that story is true. The brickwork's been patched over too many times to know for sure, but doesn't it feel right? Doesn't it make sense that the same dome which once held apricots and herbs might one day hold words too warm to say aloud? You keep walking. The first birds begin to chirp, tentatively. A donkey brays in the distance. Somewhere, a kettle's whistling. The world is waking up. But you, strangely, are growing sleepier. Your shoulders sink. Your steps soften. Your mind slows to match the pace of everything you've seen, not lazy, just deliberate. Because now you know the secret. It's not that the Persians were obsessed with cold. It's that they were gentle with it. They didn't fight heat. They didn't chase ice. They simply invited winter to linger a little longer, to coexist. And, in that quiet, conical patience, they gave us something rare, the permission to slow down, to build not for speed, but for stillness, not for excess, but for enough. You pause, one last time, and turn to look back. There, far behind, the Yakchal sits beneath the morning sun, its shadow shrinking slowly into the earth. It doesn't need to do anything else. It's already done its work. And so, have you? Your feet find softer ground now. Each step is less about moving forward, and more about settling in like a feather drifting onto a still lake. The desert wind is quiet, almost reverent, as if it, too, is remembering everything with you. You're almost at the edge of the story, not because the history is finished, but because your eyes are heavy, and some journeys are best completed in dreams. Still, before we close the dome and blow out the last lantern, let's walk just a little more. You see, this wasn't just a story about how ancient Persians kept ice cream cold in the desert. That was the surface. What it really was, what it's always been, is a story about human creativity meeting the impossible and saying, I'll figure something out. About people who didn't have air conditioners or refrigeration trucks or thermostats, and still managed to carve pockets of winter into the blazing heart of summer. You were there, remember? You stood in the cool pit where moonlight touched, ice wrapped in straw. You breathed in the scent of chilled rose petals as a scribe muttered over airflow patterns. You watched children churn sweetness into snow with giggles and sunburnt hands. You drank tea beside the last caretaker of a dying craft and watched him preserve not just cold, but time itself. This was a tour through architecture. Yes, but also through emotion, because what is a Yakchal really, if not a symbol of hope? Hope that what is fleeting can be held, even if only for a little while. Hope that comfort is worth working for, layering straw over stone, channeling wind into shadow, shaping domes with your hands, and waiting patiently for the chill to come. Here's your final mainstream fact. Passive cooling, inspired by ancient Persian technologies, is now making a comeback. Architects around the world are looking again to Yakchals, wind catchers, and earth-cooled domes as models for sustainable, low-energy design in the face of climate change. And here's one last whimsical surprise. In modern Iran, a few artisans have started crafting miniature Yakchal replicas for museums. Yes, but many as wedding gifts. The idea, a wish that the couple's future home always has coolness when needed, stillness when wanted, and sweetness enough to share. Historians still argue whether this new trend is kitsch or cultural tribute, but we both know the truth. It's love. The same kind of quiet love that built the first Yakchal, with no blueprint but patience, and no reward but the smile of someone tasting something cold after a long hot day. Now, let's wind down. You've walked far, listened well, and breathed deeply. Let the memory of cool clay, mint leaves, and snow-crusted stones settle into the soft folds of your thoughts. Let your body remember what it was like to sit in stillness, wrapped in gentle silence, beneath a dome shaped like a scoop of moonlight. You don't have to hold on to every detail, just carry the sense of it, the ease, the pace, the softness, the shade dot. Let your breath move like wind through a canard, slow, steady, never forced. The desert may be warm, but you are cool at your center now, held, preserved, at peace. Sleep is already reaching for you. Let it. No need to resist. The Yakchal still stands, back there in the dawn. It doesn't need to be watched. It knows its role. And you've done enough tonight. You've wandered well. You've remembered gently. And now, you can rest.